Well, good afternoon, and thank you, Martin, for offering to do this Zoom cast. Um,
Pleasure.
yeah, I mean, it's if you look at the history, you're a new member. You joined last year, and you've obviously recently published this very interesting book. So I'm really delighted that you were able to do this, particularly, prior to our event, next weekend as well. Um, the format of this is going to be very much loose talk. There is no PowerPoint presentation today. I will kick off with a few questions, a few comments, and then at some point we'll just open it up to the floor for a general discussion. Um, Actually, just whilst I'm on, how many here have actually read Martin's book prior to this? I can see John O'Donnell, Dan Brown, Tim, James, Scott, the other Scott. Okay, that's good news. So there's a whole chunk of people that have read the book prior to this, and then hopefully, there'll be others that will order it at some point. And as I mentioned to you in a text today, please bring some along
Mm,
for next weekend if you do have spare copies, because I'm sure that they will sell.
of course.
So. This is the book. So, just for the record, this is the book. I don't know if you can see that, but I thoroughly enjoyed it. It is somewhat of a different perspective on JFK assassination literature. I think it's relatively unique. Um, I thought also there was a really good flow to the book as well. The way you put the sequential order of the chapters together. The only book I think that has a similar feel to your book, Martin, is this one, which is Dallas 63,
Mm,
which I
a
would also
classic.
thoroughly recommend. It's by Minchilalio and Davis. And I can't think of any other book that has that kind of page turning flow without getting into the whole, nuts and bolts of evidence of assassination, conspiracy, or otherwise. So I think that is relatively unique. The other point I'd like to make is I think it's actually very funny. Um, I've come across three books, this is my personal perspective here, that I thought were really amusing. Walt Brown's Treachery in Dallas. I don't know if anyone's read that, but his writing style is very, very funny. And also quite recently, Tim Smith, who did a Zoomcast for us, Hidden in Plain Sight. So I will put it in that bracket in terms of something from amusing to laughing out loud at times. And I think actually you set the scene with the prologue. And I'm going to quote the prologue. You say, having read many books on this subject, I've occasionally been left with the feeling that I've been cornered in the pub by a lunatic. But of course, you were cornered in a pub quite recently by some lunatics when we all met in April in King's Cross. But I think that sets the tone, that type of quote, because it is pretty amusing, actually. I think it's got that typical English and somewhat self-deprecating sense of humour. So I would recommend it on that basis. And as I say, you don't pretend to solve the JFK assassination, which is quite refreshing in a way. And I think that's what also stands you apart in terms of your uniqueness. So next weekend, you're doing a talk for us on the
Mhm.
racial aspects in Dealey Plaza. So for the with regards to to this afternoon's event, if we can not talk about that side of things, because obviously that's coming up next weekend. Um, I wanted to make one quick point because obviously music has played a really important part of your life in your life, and likewise for me, I'm really
Can I
into.
just interrupt you, Neil? Tony, could you let Carl Kopak in? Think he's there he
Yeah,
is.
I've just submitted him. Yeah.
There you are, Carl. Sorry, Neil. Sorry to interrupt your flow.
That's okay. There's no worries. No, one thing that is quite prevalent throughout the book is your connection with music. Not just you, but Tony Glover as well, of course. And I just thought it was kind of interesting because in the prologue you mentioned the various track songs that have been made about the Kennedy assassination. And just as a point of order, I do have to make it clear that you missed my favorite band, which is Deep Purple. And they have got a track called Jack Ruby off their 1998 LP Abandoned. So I'm going to ask you to go and listen to that at some point.
Okay, well, I shall do that.
I
Sorry
wouldn't
about that.
argue it's the best Deep Purple track you're ever going to hear, but nevertheless there is that one out there as well. So uh, obviously, 20 odd chapters, quite unique, mostly focused on different witnesses, but not always the case. Before we get into the individual stuff, would you enlighten, for those people that haven't read the book or don't know you and it's being uploaded, would you enlighten us in terms of how you got it? I mean, it's an interesting story, it's in the prologue, but can you
Hmm.
enlighten us in terms of how you got into this? And I think more particularly why you chose this particular path in terms of writing about the assassination.
Of course. So we need to go back to 1985. I was in secondary school in Southeast London, and up to that point, all of our history lessons, followed very similar sort of format, which was the history teacher would read out a load of facts, and we would have to learn them. So, who were Henry VIII's wives? How did they die? All that sort of stuff. And then one day he came in and said, "We're going to do a lesson on the JFK assassination." Now, I'm not even sure if at that time I even knew who JFK was. Um, but the teacher laid out the sort of basic facts of that weekend, which was that obviously Kennedy got shot and Oswald was subsequently arrested. Tippit got shot, and then Jack Ruby killed Oswald. He then touched on a few of the theories, and he handed out a laminate map of Dealey Plaza. And I saw these words for the first time: Texas School Book Depository, the grassy knoll, triple underpass, words which to this day I've never heard in any other context other than this. So this became my kind of, I guess, how some people view Lord of the Rings. It seemed to have its own lexicon. I've never met anyone else. Didn't actually meet the original, but I've never met anyone called Zapruder. Everything about it seemed kind of otherworldly to me. And then he basically said, right, you've got 30 minutes, talk amongst yourselves, and I'll come back to you at the end of the class and we'll see what you've come up with. And after 30 minutes, he said, right, what do you think? And we all looked to this girl called Juliet Fuller, who was like the class boffin. She knew everything. And she put her hand up and she said, I think it might have been the CIA. And a teacher said, anyone else? Juliet Fuller had never heard the words anyone else. She'd always got the answer right. So a load of other hands went up from a bunch of 14-year-olds that had never even heard of Kennedy an hour before. And we were blaming everyone, the mafia, the Cubans, the Russians. And it was one of the most, I really remember it like it was yesterday. It was one of the most kind of vivid and kind of engaging sort of classes that I had as a child. And then when it got to the end, we all looked to the teacher to just tell us what happened. And he said, well, I don't really know either. And I thought, well, that was great. That was it was much more interesting than the, dissolution of the monasteries or whatever. Because it was open-ended and I kind of liked that. And then you mentioned about the music there, because what then happened crucially after that, this was like 85, is a series of events happened which sustained this interest for me. And so in 1988, there was a 25th anniversary. There was The Men Who Killed Kennedy, documentary screened on British TV. But also at the time, some of my favorite bands were writing songs about the Kennedy assassination, bands like, people like The Wedding Present and The Fall. And I thought, well, this must be a cool subject because my favorite bands are writing songs about it. Then there was the trial of Lee Harvey Oswald around the same time, which was on TV. And then, of course, in 1991, there was Oliver Stone's JFK, which I just walked out of the cinema with my jaw on the floor, went to a wimpy bar and literally went back and watched it again. And I don't think, that would happen, now, because I think this subject, I have to say, has been hijacked and has been slightly ruined. And I do blame the internet for some of that. But this argument, sorry, this subject has often descended into an argument, which was something I didn't encounter when I first approached the subject. It was all about, having an open mind and just enjoying the richness of the subject. And of course, Oliver Stone's JFK had a view, and of course, the men who killed Kennedy did. But it wasn't, I didn't think this subject was as perhaps as toxic as it can be in some corners of the internet now. So I wanted to write a book which didn't deal with who killed Kennedy or why, because there's about 2,000 books on the Kennedy assassination, and the vast majority of them do that. And I wanted to focus instead on, the people that were there that day, um, who have often had their lives reduced to 6 seconds. And I wanted to do those people justice. I wanted to write about Dallas, what it was like then, what it's like now. How as a city it has, memorialized this event and, coped with it. And I wanted to write about the people who continue to educate people on this subject. And there are people on this call that I include in that. There's a whole chapter on Dealey Plaza UK. But I also wanted to, there's also a chapter where I go to a school in Birmingham, and Alison Jack, who's not here today, she teaches a group of 14-year-olds all about the assassination. There was 50 of them. And she brought in toy rifles. People were doing fingerprint kits. They had a virtual reality headset where you could go to Dealey Plaza. You didn't have to leave Birmingham. And again, I saw that interest that I had, when I was a child, that these 14-year-old kids who had come into the room not knowing anything about this subject were suddenly fascinated by it. And that's what I wanted my book to do, really, which was to try and kind of reclaim it from those people online that talk to each other with caps on, and they shout a lot, and they get and the kind of best way I can describe it is, we sort of mentioned music, is there's another subject which I think is incredibly rich, which is the story of the Beatles. And I know that Carl's here today. I know Carl's a huge Beatles fan, and I'm sure some of you are. And I would say it like this, that imagine every book you ever read about the Beatles was an argument about who was best, John or Paul. And that's where I felt we had sometimes got with this case. Now, that's not to say that those arguments um, aren't good arguments and that they're not worth having. I just didn't want to do that. I wanted to do something different because my target audience wasn't the people on this Zoom call. My target audience was people that had maybe had a passing interest in the assassination, but had been put off it. They'd been scared. Conspiracy theories have become, pejorative term. So I wasn't writing for assassination buffs. I was writing for, I guess, the kind of people that like Louis Theroux and John Ronson. I was writing for people to show them this subject can be fun.
Mm.
And I know you mentioned the word funny because on the cover of the book, there is a quote from Lord Finkelstein, and he labels the book brilliant, funny, and original. This is a good example of what I'm talking about, actually. I put the book on one of the JFK assassination discussion groups, just saying this book is out. Here's some things that people have said. If you buy it, I hope you like it. Some guy said, "Oh, funny, is it? You think it's funny, do you?" And then he said, "I suppose you think Gaza's funny." And I thought, what the fuck's happened there? Excuse
Yeah,
my language.
yeah.
Um, and another person said something about they went straight into the Umbrella Man and said the Umbrella Man's, full of shit and all this sort. So and I just and I didn't have that on any other social media platform other than the JFK assassination discussion groups who took one look at the book, and there were some people that were very nice and said they would buy it, but there were some people that just immediately dismissed it. And that was what I think um has sometimes happened to this subject, unfortunately, because if I was 14, 15 now, and we've often talked about this, Neil, that the demographic of JFK assassination researchers, and I can see them now, it does lean towards an older demographic. We got James here and John, who I think are probably two of the youngest, but it does lean old.
Mm,
And I think, well, how do we get a new generation into this? And it isn't by shouting at them.
mm. Well, you raised a lot of interesting.
Sorry, long answer.
No, no,
Sorry.
that's good. It's a great answer. That's the whole point of the discussion. I mean, you raised a lot of interesting um, points there. I mean, I was talking to David Percox earlier today. We were just discussing something for Ashbourne Hill, and he brought up the vitriol that you see in this community, and you've touched on that. I personally read this book and felt at ease with it. Actually, I know that your view is not necessarily in alignment with my view, but um, what I think is interesting
Well, I
is
don't have one. Just
no,
to be clear,
that's what
I
I'm
don't
saying.
have a view.
The fact
I'm,
you
I'm
don't have,
agnostic,
but that's the point.
which is different to you, I know.
The fact that you don't have a view is not
Yeah.
necessarily in alignment with my view. That's the point I'm making. But I'm not going to berate you for not
Mm.
having a view. That's the point. I was at ease. I was very much at ease with the book. I mean, for someone to castigate you for a definite for this funny classification is missing the point. It's funny. I mean, you're not making, there is nothing in this book that says it's funny that Kennedy was assassinated or, Tippit was murdered or Oswald was murdered within the confines of the Dallas Police Department. That's not the point. It's
No,
funny.
and look, I'm very respectful and non-judgmental to everyone in the book.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of the humor is about me.
Yes,
Uh,
exactly. Exactly. It's
but one of the things
self-deprecating.
which would be interesting for this group is, when I've done interviews in, bookshops or online interviews, one of the questions that people often ask me is, who have read the book is, so this Dealey Plaza UK then, what are they really like? Like, and they
Yeah.
sort of, and they're like, they ask things like, do they believe that the moon landing was? And I'm like, no, no. This is a bunch of people with a shared interest. That there was a fellow at the event last year, and he said something which summed it up. I think his name was Richard, and he was from Glasgow. And he said whenever he mentions this subject to his group of friends, they just roll their eyes.
Mm,
So he came to the event so he could mention the subject to people that wouldn't roll their eyes.
mm.
And I think that's a really nice community. I think that's really good.
Mm,
There's nothing bad about that. It's the same as, people that follow their football team home and away every week, or, people that go bird watching or, train spotting, whatever. I think it's a really nice community because the other part of that quote you said at the start, where I said, having read lots of books on this subject, sometimes I felt like I've been cornered in a pub by a lunatic. The second part of that quote was, which I think you just alluded to, Neil, was that I wanted people to feel like they were in the company of a friend,
mm, mm.
like
Well,
throughout the book.
as I
I,
say,
I
I mean, we may differ slightly in terms of where we're kind of landing on all of this, but I mean, I felt totally at ease with the book, and also there were a couple of things that I learned from the book, which I wasn't expecting necessarily to learn, given what I thought the approach was going to be. I really enjoyed the chapter that you did on Alison. Um, the
in the
event,
school.
yeah, the event that you went to the day after the Ashbourne Hill last year. I thought that was a really interesting chapter, not just because it was fun and the kids that wanted to be mentioned in the book, but the fact that, she is out there. She's a new member as well, along with Jim. We got four people that came as virgins to the event last year and all became members. And she's doing her own thing. And the fact that you participated in that, I think is really interesting, actually. And I actually, in a way, I enjoyed that chapter slightly more than the one on Dealey Plaza UK. I mean, that was fun as well, of course, but
Mm.
I think because that target market is 14-year-old school kids, and I thought that was really really interesting that she was able to engage with them and do her thing with them, and you participated in that.
Yeah, it was great. And one of the really good things that's happened since the book was published is, I've, been asked to go to a bunch of schools. I did a thing at King's College
Mm,
a few months ago, but I'm now doing a series of talks in secondary schools, which I'm really looking forward to starting this week. Because again, I want to kind of interact with that generation that sort of swallowed the pill at the same time that I did.
mm,
And the thing about the Umbrella Man, for example, is of all of the characters in this very complicated story, his story, his sort of puzzle is really one that would appeal to a 10-year-old. Why did a man open up an umbrella on a perfectly clear day? And as soon as he did that, Kennedy, you know, got a shot. Anyone would want to. You don't need to have any interest. You don't need to know anything about Kennedy's, politics, the people surrounding him. That's a puzzle that a 10-year-old would want to solve, which is why I'm going to lead with that in the talks in the schools, but also why I lead with it in this book, because I've never met anyone who, when I tell them that story for the first time, they're so eager to get to the end of, well, what happened? Why did he do that?
mm. Well, you lead with it. It's the first significant chapter in the book.
Mm.
And I mean, I know you and I had a discussion about it at the bar at Ashbourne Hill last year.
Mhm.
And you may recall the anecdote that I relayed about, a bunch of us at breakfast discussing how many spokes were in the umbrella,
Yeah.
come the HSA testimony, which was a bit of a circus, quite frankly, as you know. So I mean, you've landed there with some, your pretty firm conclusion here is that he is an unwitting, innocent, non-conspiratorial guy that finds himself in Dealey Plaza. In fact, quite a few people found themselves in Dealey Plaza. So that's the theme of the whole book, of course.
Yeah. I
But
don't, I don't just to start, I don't go quite as far as saying I believe that. I say but I can see why it's implied that I
mm,
that I think that. Because I'm very careful not to be didactic in the book and to beat people over the head. So I think at the end of that chapter, I say for a lot of people, his story was over, but for some people, they still believe that he was conspiratorial. What I try to do in that chapter is to give, like I'm trying to do with all the witnesses, is to give them context. Is if you just view them through the lens of the assassination, of course it looks weird. If you understand the context of who this man was, what Dallas was like in 1963, and the stuff which I share in the book, which I know was relatively new to you, Neil, which was that the American right had weaponized the umbrella in the late 50s and the early 60s. And so this wasn't quite as niche as we all think it is.
mm,
And I know I sent you a clipping from the New York Times in August 1961, where a bunch of school kids in Germany sent Kennedy an umbrella in the post. So
mm,
this wasn't even the first time that this wasn't even the first time that an umbrella was used against Kennedy.
mm.
He'd
Well,
been sent.
I think that's really important to note because to me that is the absolute glory and benefit of having events like Ashbourne Hill because I'm sitting at a bar stall with you. You know, we hadn't met each other for long.
Mm,
We have this discussion on the Umbrella Man, and you bring this to my attention. And I would say that the JFK assassination law, LORE, is that, this is all bullshit. And you brought it to my attention, and you followed that up with a piece of evidence as well. And I think that's really interesting because, you know, and I'm not saying that everybody who is a member of our society is looking under every stone for a conspiracy on in terms of every
mm,
testimony, every action, every deed, whatever. But I would say it's pretty much kind of fixed in JFK assassination law that, by the time that motorcade was coming down Elm Street, the weather was absolutely fine. There's no need to have an umbrella. There's talk of the umbrella being pumping, it being pumped. We have the flechette, BS, that's been discussed and so forth. So to me, that was quite an interesting reveal,
mm,
actually, that you had something there that was credible. And, I read this book trying to put on a neutral hat. Now, that's
mm.
not particularly easy when we're already set in our ways, as you
Yeah.
know. But I
Mm.
do, even today, I try and be as objective as I possibly can. Um, and I thought if you read the chapter with an objective perspective, I think it does come across that he probably was, his own unique guy, finds himself in Dealey Plaza. It is highly unlikely that an umbrella is going to be some kind of a signal for, a very professional triangulating team. I think you make a reasonably, well, pretty good case that he's just in the wrong place at the wrong time. And like many witnesses, they didn't come forward. Either they didn't know or they didn't want to know to come forward. And it wasn't until the palaver around the HSCA that he came to the fore. Um, the only thing is, I mean, again, I think you make a reasonable argument that you call him Black Cat Man, the
Mhm.
community calls him DCM. That he
We're
didn't.
going to talk about that next week, aren't we? Or
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
talking about that
We'll
next
talk
week.
about that next week.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
you've got that component where it just seems odd that they seem to know each other but don't talk to each other. You make that case.
Well,
Um,
one of the things I think people often do, particularly in the online community, is a group of people that have never seen anyone shot dead in broad daylight tend to say, "Well, I wouldn't have acted like that."
mm,
But with the greatest respect to those people, you haven't experienced that. You don't know how you would
mm,
act. And
mm,
I always think when we're studying the photography, whether it's Umbrella Man or Black Cat Man or whether it's the Babushka Lady, a common theme often comes across with people saying um, that these people look bizarrely calm. Or I wouldn't have acted like that. Babushka Lady's standing up with a camera and everyone else is running around. I just think I understand why people do that, and that is how they caught the people that bombed the Boston Marathon, because when they studied the CCTV footage, they
mm,
noticed that one of the guys was looking not at the finish line but in the opposite direction, and they used that odd behavior to find that guy. But it's not always the case, I think, that these people are doing strange things. Because the other people that are calm in Dealey Plaza during this chaos are, of course, the people taking the photos. And my favorite photo is the cover that's on the book, Neil, which shows police motorist. This is taken 90 seconds after the assassination. You've got
mm,
Umbrella Man and Black Cat Man sitting next to each other, but you've got three photographers standing over the Newmans, almost pointing in different directions.
mm,
And whenever I show that photo to people, they think it looks staged
mm,
because they think, well, how? I don't understand why the photographers aren't running for their lives. You've got a family that are covering their children, yet these other people seem their professional instinct has just kicked in. I just want to read out a quote by John Updike because he became he became obsessed with the Umbrella Man. And he said that if anyone who doesn't know who John Updike was, he was a famous American novelist, won the Pulitzer Prize. He said in the New Yorker, I think in 1967, we wonder whether a genuine mystery is being concealed here, or whether any similar scrutiny of a minute section of time and space would yield similar strangeness, gaps, inconsistencies, warps, and bubbles in the surface of circumstance. And I think Updike was onto something there, and that's really the sort of theme of my book, is that sometimes you can zoom in too much and lose focus. And I don't know if anyone remembers, but towards the end of last year, there was a heist at the Louvre, and there was a photo of a young man dressed as
He
a
was dressed
Victorian.
in kind of like new romantic clothing, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was dressed as a Victorian detective.
Yeah.
And for 24 hours, people were like, well, who's that guy? Is he part of the heist? And
Mm.
because the world's a much more connected place now, they found him within 24 hours. And of course, he said, I just like dressing like a Victorian detective. It's just my thing. He was no part of the heist at all.
Yeah.
Um, we got a message from Paul Cummins. Paul Cummins, I don't know if you want to talk about this, Paul. But Paul has just said Louis Stephen Witt is not the Umbrella Man, in my opinion. Um, I'm happy to hear why you think that is, Paul, because I don't. I think everything's possible, but I'd be happy if you want to talk about it. By all means, do. But if you don't, fine. Or maybe Paul's not there anymore. He says I'm good, which I guess means he doesn't want to talk about it.
Okay. Maybe it does later when we open it up. Yeah, so just before we finish The Umbrella Man, a couple of things. Um, you give The Umbrella Man a break. You're very neutral. I think you are objective, but there are other witnesses later on that you don't actually, you don't give such a break. So I just want to make sure that the audience know that it's not like you're going in with a totally neutral perspective every time.
Mm.
And, this is the human side of life and side of things. And, everything is possible because there's certainly some characters that you comment on in your book with specific chapters that I don't think you are so generous on in terms of giving a break. And secondly, one of the issues I did take with you last year, I think, about the Umbrella Man was just if you look at his testimony, he seems to have no idea about the real estate of Dealey Plaza. I mean, he's all over the place in terms of his actual testimony, which I find odd. That doesn't mean it's conspiratorial, of course, but
Okay.
I do find it very odd. And I suppose, without putting words into your mouth, you'd argue, well, look, we react differently, and he can't remember, and he didn't go down there much, I suppose.
I mean, the thing I would say, if you believe Louis Stephen Witt, and I think you have to, uh, I think you have to give some thought as to how he got discovered, right? So, Louis Stephen Witt had no idea he was a person of interest, right?
Hmm.
He hadn't read any of the books. He didn't read John Updike in the New Yorker. I compare him in the book to. Um, I'm sure everyone here has seen the album cover for Abbey Road by the Beatles.
Of course.
There's a man in the background of that album cover. He's on the side of the street looking back at the Beatles. He was a tourist from Florida. He had no idea, this guy, that he was on the album cover for Abbey Road until
Hmm.
years later, his wife, who was a piano teacher, bought the album to teach her kids at school. And he looked at it and he said, "Well, hang on a minute, that's me on the cover."
Hmm.
He had no idea. And from what I understand about Louis Stephen Witt is he just went back to work that day. He did not. He didn't know this subject as well as all of the people on this call. And just because he was there doesn't mean he's an expert. And it doesn't mean that he's continually rethought about this over and over again, because as we said, he never originally came forward.
Mm.
And on that day in 77, 78, when he first saw his photo in the Dallas newspapers, when they were calling for witnesses for the HSCA, that was the first time he ever knew that he was a person of interest. And he screwed that paper up and put it in the bin. It was only because he had friends that phoned the number and said, I know this guy. His name's Louis Stephen Witt. He lives in Northfield Street. He works in insurance. Within an hour, they're knocking on his door. So you're asking someone who who hasn't studied the photography as much as the experts, who at that time may not have seen the Zapruder film. He's not immersed in assassination law. And you're asking him to remember in huge detail something that he did 15 years ago in terms of when he walked down from the pagoda to the curb. And I would just say that's a very, very hard thing to do. And and I think in all the witnesses, and I'm good friends with Tony Glover, who was 11 at the time, they get this stuff wrong.
Mm. No, I accept that. I think it's a very, very reasonable argument. I don't, um, I can buy into that argument, Martin.
But what I find interesting is that the sort of people that just dismiss what are the things I'm trying to do in that chapter is a lot of people just dismiss the umbrella protest as it was too niche
Mm.
and it wouldn't. And I'm trying to. There's a section where I talk about Richard Nixon during his debate for the vice presidential candidate with Adlai Stevenson. Richard Nixon says that Adlai Stevenson is the biggest umbrella man of our generation.
Yeah,
She's in the late 50s. This is not, and the thing that I think I've said this to you, Neil, is a lot of people on social media now, they use the watermelon symbol in their social media posts and their social media biographies. Does anyone know what that watermelon symbol means? Carl, what does it mean? Tell us what it means.
I'm guessing it's a nod to Palestine.
Correct. Okay. Did everyone else know that, or is that just news to you all?
it's news to
Okay.
me.
Okay. So watermelon
Same,
symbol.
same colours as the flag.
Yeah, same colours as the Palestinian flag. Lots and lots of people now use the watermelon as a symbol of their support for Palestine. And it's perfectly, feasible that in, 60 years' time, this becomes something like the Umbrella Man protest, where people are, I mean, I'm not trying to be flippant about it. Whereas if there was a kind of watermelon man, if someone had held up a flag with a watermelon on as either Keir Starmer or Benjamin, Netanyahu or anyone, drove past, there'd be a lot of people that would think that would be pretty fucking weird.
Mm.
But me and Carl would know that that was a symbol showing their support for Palestine.
Mm.
So, and coincidentally, when I walked home last Friday, uh, where I live in Nottingham now, I walked past a bunch of people on a Friday night who all had yellow umbrellas up. And
Mm.
of course, my interest was piqued, and I went up to them and I said, "What's going on?" They were in front of the Brian Clough statue in a Nottingham city centre, which is like a speaker's corner, and they all had a yellow umbrella up, and they're part of the Hong Kong umbrella movement, which is not related to appeasement, but again, it's a group of people who are using umbrellas as a form of protest.
Mm.
So what I don't understand is by all means have a view that Louis Stephen Witt wasn't the umbrella man, but you have to take into account the context of the time and say this wasn't as weird as people think it is.
I think that's demonstrated in the chapter with respect to the demonstration evidence. So I
Mm.
don't have a problem with that. It was you mentioned to me last year. You've documented it again. I think I'm pretty comfortable with that. So let's move on, Martin. We won't talk about Black Cat Man slash Dark Complected Man because I think that's something we can cover next week. So let's move on to the much maligned Howard Brennan, who is your next guy. I don't think the way I read it, I'm trying to be objective. I don't think you give Howard Brennan as much of a break as you give Umbrella Man. That was my interpretation as a neutral reader. Um, I think
Howard Brennan's a very hard man to give a break to because if you've read his autobiography,
hmm.
he is so in love with himself that whenever you start to feel sympathy for him and what he's gone through, and it is true that his health did suffer,
Hmm.
and the kind of weight of being a star witness did negatively affect his life. But he does often come up with certain phrases which make you think, God, this guy. So I think the first line in his autobiography is something like that. This is it. Yeah, he says, "My vision is unusually good. I'm one of the select few who, for some reason, are gifted with extraordinary eyesight."
Which you do draw on upon several times throughout the book, how wonderful his vision is.
He then says, "My faith leads me to believe that my gift of super eyesight,"
Hmm.
so it's not just good eyesight anymore, he's got super eyesight, "may have caused Providence to place me at that spot in Dealey Plaza." So he's basically saying, my eyesight is so good that God put me there.
Hmm.
Um, and then there's something else further on in the book where he says, "Sometimes I've wondered how and why I survived these 20 years since the assassination. I can only believe there is some larger purpose to be served. I now believe this is so the rest of the world can finally have the opportunity to look through my eyes
Hmm.
at the assassination exactly as it occurred." So I do have some sympathy for Brennan. He's certainly for the non-conspiracy witnesses. He has been attacked a lot. He's mentioned in the index of rush to judgment more than any other witness, and Mark Lane does take him apart for, I think, some valid reasons. He he obviously got a few things wrong, Brennan, in terms of either whether it's his position on the wall, the fact that he thought the assassin was standing, which wouldn't have been possible,
Yeah.
and various other things. Um, but yeah, if there's any if there's any sarcasm towards him, it's only to puncture his own superciliousness that
Hmm.
that he has that he has laced through his own books.
Well, I must admit, I had one of those wow moments when I read that chapter. His book did come my way through one of the collections that we sporadically get bequeathed, and I'm really glad I didn't purchase that book. Somebody else in the society bought it, but the claim, that Agent Leash introduces him to a agent who is a JFK double, who even speaks to like JFK. I mean, I fell off my chair, so I immediately emailed Vince Palomara, who, as you know, is the Secret Service
Hmm.
researcher specialist. That just as a sanity check, to be honest with you, have you come across any notion that there may have been in November '63 the Secret Service were using because what I actually referred to, it was a real thing in World War II, and there was a film made about it in '58. It was Montgomery. I was Montgomery's double. I don't know if you know about that, General Montgomery, and it was actually something that the British Army did in the Second World War. And I thought, well, is it possible? Anyway, he came back and dismissed this immediately. And he, funny enough, he said, "You're the second person that's asked that very recently." So I wonder
Wow.
if somebody had also read your book and posed the same question.
So, for the people on this call that haven't either read my book or Howard Brennan's autobiography, there's a moment on the day of the assassination when a Secret Service guy, when according to Brennan, a Secret Service guy turns up at his house and behind him is another guy. And as soon as Brennan sees him, he goes white.
And his wife apparently goes
Yeah,
white.
because it's JFK's double. JFK's double, according to Howard Brennan, has come to visit him on the afternoon of the assassination, and they both share stories over tea and biscuits. And there's another bit later on in his biography where he says he was in a bar
Yes.
in the 70s.
Oh, my name showed up.
Oh, hi, Matt.
Hey, Martin, how are you?
Good, thank you. There's another bit later on in Howard Brennan's autobiography where he says he's at a bar and Jane Russell, the famous Hollywood actress, offers to buy him a drink just so she can hear his stories. And again, I just don't, and he talks about how, Earl Warren was saying to Howard Brennan, "Would you like to meet Jackie Kennedy? I can make that happen." I mean, look, that all could be true, but I think Brennan is a I don't know what he saw. I've obviously sat where he sat, and I think it is tricky. But I don't have super eyesight, Neil, and as Howard
No,
Brennan
clearly,
teaches,
I can see that. Um, I mean, the other thing is, if you look at the Zapruder film, he's following the limo all the way
yeah.
down. Yeah, I mean, so that in itself is probably debunks a lot of what he said. But certainly, you don't give Brennan the break that you would give Umbrella Man. I actually, my personal, I mean, I think throughout the whole book, you're very sympathetic in the main, or empathetic with all of the people that were dragged into this saga because they found themselves in Dealey, in Dealey Plaza. Um, I know, we can take the facetious and cynical view on Brennan. I actually, when I read that chapter, I thought it was a bit sad. I thought,
I think I think at the bit at the end where I'd say he's kind of like a 50s guy stuck in a 60s nightmare. Like he sort of lived in this wonderful named place called Urbandale.
mm,
And when he left in the morning, he did promise his wife they'd go furniture shopping, and he did still manage to go furniture shopping with
mm.
his wife. He comes across as a man who I think tried to inject himself perhaps into this story um more than he should have done. But I also think it is sad that you look at there's a fabulous bit where because his kind of health continues to deteriorate through stress. His personal doctor says something to him, which must be a first, where his doctor says, "Howard, you have to stop talking about the JFK assassination." Which I think is perhaps good medical advice for all
Perhaps,
of us.
perhaps they should say that to Beverly Oliver, but that's another chapter. All right. Well, so the next chapter, Bowers and Mormon come up. I think you call that either side of the fence, something like that. Do you have anything you want to say strongly on either Lee Bowers or Mormon?
No, I just wanted to get across. Again, I was kind of writing this for people that maybe didn't know too much about it. So that chapter was really setting the scene that look, there's these two different perspectives of whether shots came from the book depository, the grass, or even other places. So I'm just trying to introduce the reader to different theories. I think the Lee Bauer stuff is interesting to me from a human element because the theme of the book really is that the main event that day was supposed to be in Main Street, something like 150 to 200,000 people, went to Main Street. That was where the party was, and this small amount of people opted out of that went to Dealey Plaza and then got caught up in the most studied 6
Mm.
seconds in the 20th century. But Lee Bowers, he was just someone that went to work. He was in
Yeah,
that tower from 7 o'clock in the morning. He wasn't trying to be a witness. He wasn't trying to do anything. And when everyone ran to the grassy knoll, well, not everyone, but when a lot of people ran to the grassy knoll after the assassination, well, he was there the whole time. The only person really that had, depending on whether you believe people like Hoffman, but certainly the person that had the clearest view of this highly controversial piece of geography was someone that had, I would argue, little interest in, the motor. Okay, he was just doing his job.
yeah.
And I found that, just from a human perspective, interesting. And then, of course, they forget that they've left on the other side of the road, they've left Mormon,
Mm.
who's got this Polaroid. And I do find Mormon's story, I mean, she's an interesting woman. And I don't think there's anything in a photo. I do touch on Badgeman and all of that sort of stuff
Yeah.
because it was one of the things that happened in 1988 during the Men Who Killed Kennedy doc. But I,
But generally debunked, Martin. That
I mean, I would think so, but you never. But I
I
remember,
know.
I remember, I remember you said to me last year, Neil, that you had met someone once that didn't believe that Lee Harvey Oswald worked at the Texas School Book Depository.
Yeah, so
So
he's a prominent researcher, and he's still maintaining that.
yeah, so everything's up for grabs for some
Mm.
people.
Yeah. It's interesting what you said about doing his job because that photo that you alluded to before, the photo on your main, photo on the front page of your book,
Yeah.
it's really interesting because you've got a cluster of people who are, you know, taking photographs because that's their professional demeanor. You've also got people who are terrified and worried about protecting their children.
Hmm.
And then you've got, let's call him Black Cat Man and Umbrella Man, who are just in a state of whatever. I don't even know how to describe it. They're sitting there
Well, in his
doing nothing.
HSCA testimony, Louis Stephen Witt says that he was in a state of shock
Yeah.
and he just sat down.
But
But you don't know how long that. I mean, the thing about a photo is it's a split second. He might have been sitting down for 5 seconds. Who knows? But the thing that strikes me about that photo is you can 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. There's like 11 people in it.
mm,
This is Dealey Plaza 90 seconds after the assassination.
yeah,
And you really do get to see how, Dealey Plaza was the opposite of Main Street. So if, Main Street was the party, then Dealey Plaza's the kitchen.
I
And
read.
there's the
Sorry, carry on.
go, come on.
I read somewhere that it either came from Mary Mormon or Jean Hill that they knew the police. They knew local police, and one of them said that the infield area, i.e., the area that we see from Zapruder, um, was basically off limits. The police were trying to stop people from standing in the infield area. I mean, if you look at the north side of Elm, far more people, and on the
Mm.
on the infield area, a lot less. Um, and it may be that just as the motorcade went on, as time went on, they took a slightly more relaxed view, and we get is it I think Charles Brem, is he on that side,
Yeah,
and Summers is on that side. Organs is there, for example, but there's still only a smattering of
yeah,
people, on the infield. So, that also may have played a part as to why there were so few people at the tail end of the motorcade, particularly in field, because the police they were perhaps actually doing their job on that side,
maybe.
you know. All right, well, look, so let's move on to so there's a chapter, Sounds of Silence, and I'm particularly interested in Michael Brownlow, more so, well, obviously he claims to be in Dealey Plaza. He was a researcher. He has passed a few years ago. I texted Scott the other day just because I know Scott has met him back in the day several times
Hmm.
when he's been in Dealey Plaza. Um, I guess I'm interested in more in terms of 10th and Patton, but obviously your focus has been more on Dealey Plaza. Have you met Michael Brown? Did you meet Michael Brownlow?
I did meet Michael Brownlow in 2013, 50th
Yeah.
anniversary.
And what do you make of him?
I mean, I would say I met him for 10 minutes. I remember he said that he thought he heard 6 shots.
Hmm.
And he was standing next to a guy at the time who said that he thought he heard, 3 shots.
Hmm.
So, trying to make sense of the sort of witnesses, memories is extremely difficult. And we all know that, ear witness and eyewitness testimony at the best of times can be fairly unreliable.
Hmm.
But when you're talking about an event which is in our own collective memory and has been reported upon thousands of times, even from that very day, there were news reports talking about 3 shots and everything. It's really hard to construct your own original memory from that.
Hmm.
So I have long since, um, if I'm talking to witnesses and I just don't have a view whether I believe them or not, really, because I just don't know. And I did an interview with Tony Glover in Dallas, last year, and she was very honest about her, role as a witness, and one of the surviving witnesses is that she has a desire to please. She wants to tell people she thinks what they want to hear.
Hmm.
And I just think it's so difficult to really get this right. And I guess my favorite analogy on this, which isn't in the book actually, and has nothing to do with the JFK assassination, but in 1984, 1985, Liverpool Football Club were playing Man United in, I think it was the League Cup. And at the time, there was a broadcast strike, Neil, so the game wasn't filmed.
Hmm.
And Jan Molby, the Danish midfielder for Liverpool, picked up the ball in his own half. And all we know, and the whole Man United team are ahead of him. And all we know is that he scores this incredible goal. And there was only 31,000 people there. It was never filmed. So all we've got is their eyewitness testimony on this goal. And according to some people, he hit it from 30 yards. Other people say, no, no, it was 35 yards. Someone said, no, he went past the whole Man United team and he hit it from 40 yards. And my favourite is he hit the ball so hard that Gary Bailey, the Man United goalkeeper, had to dive out of the way. So what you have here is these 31,000 people all having a different experience of this goal. And it became known as the greatest goal you never saw. Right? Because it was such a good goal. But here's the interesting bit. About 15 years ago, Jan Jan Molby held a press conference at Anfield because unbeknown to all of us, the game had been videoed by Merseyside police. Um, or I think it's either Merseyside police or it was filmed by Manchester United so they could study it for tactical analysis. And because Jan Molby had scored this goal, they gave him a VHS of it on the day of the assassin. Sorry, not on the day of the assassination, on the day that he scored the goal. So
Hmm.
Jan Molby had a video the whole time, but he enjoyed all of this stuff about this goal that he scored.
Hmm.
And then he held this press conference where he said, I'm now going to show everyone the goal.
Okay.
You can all see it. And do you know what happened? he got besieged by loads of people who were at that game, and they said, "Don't you dare do that, because I've got my own memory of that goal,
Yeah.
and I don't want to see the empirical evidence of what happened."
Mm.
And I think that is one of the most fascinating stories about eyewitness testimony, is that people would rather have their memory of it than the objective evidence of what that goal was like. And I think some of that certainly happens, in this case, that people are very precious about their memories.
Mm.
And and in this case, you can't really prove them wrong.
Mm.
But in the case of Jan Molby's goal, which some people now have posted in the chat, it's a good goal, Neil, but it's nowhere near as good as everyone said it was. Right?
Well, that's fascinating. I mean, I'm going to touch on this when I do my talk next weekend. How eyewitness and ear witness testimony is notoriously challenged. If you look at anybody that has looked at the Kennedy assassination, all aspects of it, who come from a law enforcement background, a lot of them are, you know, just very, very wary of eyewitness and ear witness testimony. As you say, I mean, people can look at an event, an incident, and they can have, 10 people might watch a car accident and they may have 6 or 7 or 8 different takes on what actually happened, some of which is to do with, traumatic distress. And other is just what it's just what happens. They get mixed up, and I've actually used this anecdote before. I don't. Ryan's not on the call today, but one year when I went to Dallas, Ryan picked me up from Houston. We drove 3 hours to Dallas. I was living the dream. I stayed in a bungalow in Oak Cliff. And as we pulled up, I was a couple of blocks or so north of Jefferson. And I was, west. I was basically on the fringe of the Bishop's Arc district. We pulled up. He was getting my luggage out of the car. I went to the lockbox to get the key for this rental. And as that was happening, shots broke out, which for a Brit is really quite rare to hear gunshots. And I saw a car traveling from west to east and then turned south it was actually on Sunset, I think, to go the couple of blocks towards Jefferson. And 2 squad cars came from either direction, west and the east, following this car. And I heard 5 shots. I absolutely, categorically know I heard 5 shots. I counted them, possibly because of, researching the assassination. Ryan, who was with me, is absolutely categoric that he thinks there were 5 to 8 shots. And this all happened, and we discussed this 90 seconds after the event. So there you go. That's a true anecdote, true experience, 2 JFK assassination researchers hearing something and having completely different perspectives within 90 seconds.
The thing about being a eyewitness or an ear witness is that is it is that you never know that you're going to be called upon to do that
No.
until it's too late. So you
Mm.
can't prepare for it. And one of the things that I've been doing on some of the events that I've been doing around the book is, often in a, bookshop or whatever, someone will introduce me and they'll, come out the front and they'll introduce me to the audience there. And they'll spend about 20 seconds doing it. And about halfway into the event, I will ask someone to describe that person who stood up there for 20 seconds. So how tall were they? What were they wearing? What was on their feet? And they never get it right. And I say to the audience, this person was up there for 20 seconds. She was talking to you all. And I often ask 3 or 4 people to describe her.
Yeah.
And it's different colored clothing, it's different heights, it's different shoes. And that because you don't know.
Have you ever
You're
seen
going to be an
that?
eyewitness.
Have you ever seen that video? And again, it's used to demonstrate exactly the same point, where you've got some people in a scene, and you've got a guy dressed in a gorilla suit who walks
Yeah.
past this scene of people in the
Yeah.
background, fleetingly, but it's as clear as mud that you've got a, you know, you've got a guy in a gorilla suit, and nobody spots it. Nobody
Mm.
knows. I mean, it's very bizarre the way we deal with things. Look, I think we're probably coming up to roughly the halfway mark. Should we just finish off with Beverly Oliver, who I don't think you give a break to either?
Oh, come on. I'm dead nice about her. I see she. So look, there's a really nice chapter about Abraham Zapruder, who I
Mm,
think is a total hero of
mm.
the whole thing. Um, do I believe Beverly Oliver? Well, it's tricky. Uh, I remember once, Neil, you said to me you spent an entire weekend studying her calves. Is one of the
It's just a
quotes.
guilty pleasure,
I
Martin.
know one of the quotes that didn't make it to the book. I think it's very, very hard to believe her because she looks so different to the babushka lady, and she has so many inconsistencies in her story, whether it's the camera that she was given,
Mm,
and all of that sort of stuff. What I do say about Beverly in the book is that I'm glad she's told her story because I think she tends to put a smile on people's faces, and you know, there's a theme in my book, which is I think that the people in Dealey Plaza are these people who are in the kitchen at parties. They are the people who have opted out of the main event, which in that case was in Main Street. I actually think Beverly Oliver may be the opposite to that phenomenon. There's no way she spends her time in the kitchen at parties. She's in the living room on the table, singing as loudly as anyone else. And I think it's possible, I don't know this, but here's someone that maybe has just injected themselves into the story because the biggest thing ever's happened in her town, and maybe she missed it. But on the other hand, and I do say this in the book, it is fascinating to me the way that she got discovered. She didn't find anyone to tell her story. She was just having lunch with a guy she didn't know was a JFK assassination researcher, which was Gary Shaw. And
mm.
she saw in his bookshelf loads of books about the assassination, and she said, I don't know if you know this, but I was there that day. I don't really like to talk about it, which is
Mm.
something she's definitely changed her mind on
That's
since.
true. Yeah, well,
And
that story. I mean, I independently, I got this from Gary Shaw and Chris Gallup when I went
mm,
to a Kappa conference in Dallas in 2019, and I made some flippant comment about, some people believing that Beverly Oliver is a babushka lady when I first met Chris, and he was absolutely adamant. Well, I know she is the babushka lady.
well, look,
And,
I mean,
and quite recently,
it-
Gary Shaw, later at Chris's conference seminar, absolutely, made a presentation which specifically defended her, and so there
but
is.
again, what we're talking about here is human nature, right?
Mm.
If if there's a chance that you found one of the missing witnesses, are you more likely to believe that, or are you less likely to believe
I
that?
think you're
Does,
more. I think you're more likely
exactly.
to believe that, and
Does
particularly
Gary Shaw want to believe that
he
the woman that
does.
he's
He
having
does,
lunch
and as you say, she didn't present herself. It came out serendipitously, an event that
there are things about Oliver's story which I have to scratch my head over. I mean that lunch. No, I don't mean in terms of believing her. There are things about the story which give me pause to disbelieve her
yeah,
because, as you say, the way she was discovered, and then apparently during that lunch, Gary Shaw basically said, stop eating, put her in a car, drove her 50 miles to Dealey Plaza, and
mm,
said, okay, you stand where you did that day.
yeah.
And she stood, according to Gary Shaw, in exactly the same place as the babushka lady. So you've got to think, well, this doesn't sound like a sort of plan for a grifter. You're just having an innocent lunch. And then
Mm.
the other part which gives me pause for thought is if she's not the babushka lady, how did she know that the real babushka lady would never come forward and expose her as a charlatan?
Yeah.
How did she know that?
Mm.
So, look, on the balance of probabilities, I don't think she is, but I'm very, very glad that she told her story because I think it's the theme in the book is all human nature is in Dealey Plaza. And I include Beverly in that. And I do think, I know some people, I had this conversation with Stephen Fagan, where I said to him, she's harmless enough. And Stephen wasn't quite sure whether she was harmless. But at the same time, he was smiling when he was telling me that. And that's
Mm.
the thing about Beverly is
He
that
obviously hasn't heard her sing then, Martin.
that's I remember someone in 2013 when I was at Lancer said to me, she was singing Let's Twist Again, right? And there are people like Jim Mars that 5 minutes before you would not believe had the ability to twist, right? And Jim Mars got up on his feet and was dancing like a 25-year-old, right? It was like an old-fashioned revival. And someone next to me said, do you think she is the babushka lady, or is she someone just trying to promote a singing career?
Mm.
And I said, well, she must be the babushka lady, because otherwise she'd be a better singer.
Oh dear. Well, on that note, look, why
Oh,
don't we?
Pete's just been kissed by Beverly. Well, not just been kissed by Beverly Oliver, but Pete has just entered into the chat to say that on top of going to see Bob Dylan at the Isle of Wight in 1969, he's also been kissed by Beverly Oliver.
Well, there
There you
you
go.
go. There you go. Look, should we just take a comfort break or a refreshment break for about 5 minutes? I'll pause the recording and then we'll go on to the second half. Okay,
Okay,
that's all right.
good for me.
Okay. Uh, Peter, this is pausing. Okay, so the next chapter that's quite important is the tramps. I mean, the conclusion from that chapter is that there's nothing to see here at all. I mean, we had the sort of three tramps that, were in the frame originally, then Fontaine discovers the documentation, and there are others subsequently that think that the tramps are other people. Do you want to just summarize your overall impressions on the tramps aspect of things?
I think it's a fascinating story, The Tramps, because it really, again, like a lot of these stories, they tell us more about us than they do about often the people in Dealey Plaza. And what I like about the Tramp story is this idea that they were too smart, they were too clean shaven, and all of this sort of stuff. They didn't fit our definition of what a tramp is. And I mean, look, there are good reasons for why people were genuinely suspicious about them. But I would argue those reasons are down to the fact that their arrest records initially went missing. That's the bit that's interesting. But the most interesting thing about the tramps is that there was a fourth tramp, which I don't want to spoil it for people that haven't read the book, but because all of the focus was on the three tramps who 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 became suspicious because they didn't look like tramps. And then we ignored the fourth tramp who acted like a stereotypical drunk tramp. And I find that a fascinating thing that happened in this case. And that chapter's designed to give you kind of whiplash, and that you think it's another story where you think, oh, okay, this is another nothing to see here
Mm.
chapter. And then you introduce the fourth tramp and you're like, oh, okay, well, maybe there is something to see after all.
Yep. I mean, I don't really personally have a great deal to add about the tramps. I wonder if it's all a bit of a distraction. But
I often find a lot of these things are, like I I I'm I mean I'm fascinated with the idea that the Umbrella Man was a signal because I just don't think that's how trained assassins work.
Hmm.
I mean I think they look through um they have high-powered rifles, they're looking through telescopic scopes. I've never known any other assassination ever to have needed a man with an umbrella
Hmm.
to act as a signal. And we look, we've all been to Elm Street. It's a straight line. It's not if you've worked out that's where the triangulation of crossfire is beforehand. I really don't understand why someone would need an umbrella for that. I saw another theory recently, which was the umbrella was a symbol for the lack of umbrella air cover that Kennedy gave
But
at the
they're
Bay of
pigs.
Pigs,
Yeah.
which is a
Mm.
very, very convoluted mime to give to someone
Mm.
just before they die.
Mm. Yeah.
But yeah, so I think with the tramps, again, it's this phrase I use in the book quite a lot about these people is that there are times when we zoom in too much and we lose focus. And when you then learn the tramp story and you again similar to Lee Bowers, they weren't there to take part in an event. They weren't there to witness anything. They'd spent the night in a homeless shelter. They got a change of clothes. They had a shave and a wash, and they were trying to just jump a train to go to Fort Worth.
Mm.
And 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 I think when they got discovered in the late 80s, two of them were still alive, and they verified that they were them. And a third one, I think it was Abraham's, had died, but his sister, verified that it was him. But of course, you still have people now saying it was Woody Harrelson's dad, it's Frank Sturgis, and all of this sort of stuff.
Chauncey
This stuff,
Holt. Yeah.
Chancey Holt, this stuff goes on
Mm.
all the
Mm.
time.
Mm. Mm. Okay. So then you spend a chapter which takes a look at Oswald's childhood.
Hmm.
Do you want to express any views on that?
I just really wanted to say in that chapter that what interests me is the way that various authors down the years have, weaponized Oswald's, biography, or they've not included it at all.
Hmm.
Um,
So from either side, you mean?
yeah, so if if you're an Oswald did it author, then much of your book is often dedicated to the fact that he allegedly beat his wife, um, and he had these mental health issues when he was a child. We know that he was in a youth house in New York where he had a pretty damning psychological assessment. Um, so, but if you're an Oswald didn't do it guy, that never comes up in the book. So what I think sort of Larry Hancock is one of the few people that I've heard say, I don't think Oswald did it, and I also think he's an arsehole.
Hmm.
And I think you very rarely get that.
Hmm.
And so I just wanted to explore his childhood, the fact that he'd had these 64 addresses in only 24 years of his life, and compare that to my own childhood, where you talk about my father being in prison and stuff like that. Um, and just really make a case that Lee Harvey Oswald is a very complex character, and whatever you say about him, you can often say the opposite as well.
Hmm.
But I've been intrigued about how people have used his biography either for him or against him.
Yeah. Well, I think it was all in line with your human side overlay that's prevalent
Yeah.
throughout the book, quite frankly, and it was interesting without taking a particular perspective. Um, So the next chapter was, I think, Nut Country, where you were talking about the Texas right wing problems. We go back to Johnson, we go back to Adlai Stevenson. Again, that's covered in the Dallas 63 book as well. Do you want to
Yeah,
just enlighten
what
the audience there in terms of the
what I
where you
wanted to
stand?
do there is obviously I'm assuming everyone knows that on the morning of the assassination, Kennedy is in his hotel in Fort Worth. He's reading the Dallas Morning News and he says to Jackie, "We are headed into nut country." And I wanted to tell the story of Dallas through the two Dealeys.
Mm,
George Dealey, who was the sort of moderate hero that they named Dealey Plaza after, and then Ed Dealey, who was definitely not moderate. So having so far taken a very kind of micro, approach to the assassination, I now really wanted to take a sort of macro approach, which which gives the context of this city that Kennedy was entering that day, where even a segregationist senator said to Kennedy, "I wouldn't even go there."
yeah.
Lots and lots of people tried to talk Kennedy out of it, and the irony that after he'd had this spat with Ed Dealey at the White House, that it's in Dealey Plaza that he gets shot. Um, he's in Dallas less than an hour. And
Mm,
we all know about the wanted for treason, leaflets. We know about the welcome to Dallas, Mr. Kennedy stuff in the Dallas Morning News. Um, and that was the last thing he ever signed, actually. The last thing he ever signed was that day's Dallas Morning News, which was given to him by a chambermaid. So, and then of course, when it gets to Dealey Plaza in that chapter, we go micro again because then having understood the politics and the context of Dallas at the time, then suddenly Louis Stephen Witt makes sense.
mm,
And I also mentioned that Howard Brennan over eggs and bacon that morning was telling his wife that he didn't agree with Kennedy. He wasn't a Kennedy fan. He thought he was too soft on communism. Beverly Oliver has always said that she is she was a Democrat up to that day,
mm,
whereas now she's a very much a Trump supporting Republican. Abraham Zapruder, who was an immigrant who loved Kennedy. What a lot of people don't know is this wasn't even the first murder that he had witnessed.
mm.
So having gone kind of macro, I wanted to bring it back into these individual characters. People like Roy Truly, who hated Kennedy,
Yeah.
hated communism,
Mm,
but had employed Lee Harvey Oswald, who had defected to Russia.
mm,
Um, and then I was interested in the journey that Dallas went, after the assassination, how it dealt with the city of hate, and how Dallas now is the kind of almost a sort of moderate jewel within Texas. So, you know, Dallas voted for Obama twice, which would be inconceivable in 1963.
mm,
Voted for Biden, only the second Catholic to run for president. They voted for Kamala Harris,
yeah.
first African American woman
Mm,
standing as president. So
mm,
Dallas has gone on this huge journey since then. And then I make a link between Dallas 63 and America now because it feels from the outside, and apologies to Matt, who I know is American. There may be some other people, but looking from the outside, it feels like the whole country's gone nut country now.
mm. Well, you could say the
Uh,
same about the UK, Martin.
yeah, yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. And I think it's the danger of extremist politics.
You touched on something there when you were talking earlier about we don't know how people are going to react under pressure. Um, just a couple of points I wanted to raise. I've always found it very odd that people would run towards the grassy knoll if that's where the shots came from. Now, I don't know if that's herd mentality. I guess we don't know what the time lag is from the last shot to this surge up the
Mm.
grassy knoll and to the diagonal part of the underpass where it meets the western side of the stockade fence. But it does intuitively, it feels odd. That's the last place. I mean, we know that uh, the black couple who were sitting around Robert Groden's pitch, I mean, they skedaddled out of there. We know what the Newmans did. I've always felt it's a little bit odd that they ran up the grass, and you mentioned Truly. That's what triggered me bringing this point up. Never, never bought into this idea that Truly goes up the stairs first, hunting for an assassin without a weapon, whilst there's a
Mm.
police officer allegedly. I mean, you can, Bart's on this call still, I think. I mean, he'll have a very strong view on this. But that Trudy's running up the northwest corner stairwell ahead of Marion Baker. That doesn't sit very comfortably with me either.
No, and look, there are some people that, ran to the book depository. There's some people that ran to the grassy knoll. I think it's a fool's errand trying to attribute motive to any of these people from our position here in, June 2026. I think it's so difficult.
Mm. No, I think that's a very fair point, particularly under those appalling circumstances as well. I think you actually mentioned Zapruder. Of course, there was a chapter on Zapruder, which I
Yeah.
forgot to mention
Fine.
earlier on. Do you want to go back a bit and
No, I
make
just,
any comments on him
I
at all?
just, I am, I genuinely think he's a bit of a hero. He's another person who, when you read the testimony of a lot of people who were in Dealey Plaza, you really do wonder how they got in this situation. So when you read Louis Stephen Witt's testimony for the HSCA, he talks about walking down the length of Main Street with his umbrella.
Mm,
And at every block he thought, not here, not here. I don't want to draw too much attention to myself. So
mm,
he gets in Dealey Plaza, and on his right, there's a mound of grass which is awaiting a catchier name. And on his left is the Texas School Book Depository with a window half open. And Louis Stephen Witt thinks, I'll do this heckle here. No one will notice me here. Of
mm.
course, he gets caught up in the most studied 6 seconds in our
History.
history.
Mm,
Howard Brennan finishes his lunch on a corner of Record and Main Street. He looks out into the crowd in Main Street and he thinks, I can't be bothered with that. There's too many people, there's too much jostling.
mm,
So after his lunch, he walks to the less populated Dealey Plaza. He sits on a wall opposite the Texas School Book Depository and he thinks, I'll just sit here. It's
mm,
nice and easy and relaxed. And Abraham Zapruder is perhaps the best example of these people that certainly didn't make any effort to sort of be there. Where, of course, he had left his camera at home that day because
mm,
when he woke up in the morning, not only was it overcast, but again, a bit like Brennan and a little bit like Louis Stephen Witt, Abraham Zapruder thought about the idea of jostling for position, and he just couldn't be bothered. And the thing is, Neil, I'm like that. That's why these people appeal to me, because if I've been at a festival and everyone's going to the main stage, there's often a group of people who are walking in the opposite direction to see a smaller act somewhere else. I mean, these people are this personality trait appeals to me, and in Abraham Zapruder, you have this person, I think, who even when he comes back to Jennifer Junior's with his camera and he notices that Lillian Rogers has let
Hey,
everyone out for
it
lunch.
says Susan Sakane.
Well, Matt,
Yes.
You need to mute, Matt. Please mute.
Oh, I thought you had me muted.
Okay. Carry
Now
on.
everyone is muted.
Okay. Carry on, Martin.
sorry. So even when Zapruder comes back to Jennifer Junior's with his camera
Mm,
and he sees Lillian Rogers and he notices that she's let everybody out for lunch, he says to Lillian Rogers, Here you have the camera. I'll look after the office.
Mm.
He's doing everything he can. Um, you know, obviously not to avoid this thing because he doesn't know it's going to happen. But he's the most reluctant of witnesses. And it ends up with Lillian Rogers saying to him, I don't know how it works, Abe. It's
Mm.
your camera. And she basically pushes him out the door. And then, of course, he's in Dealey Plaza
She does come
doing some.
across in your chapter as quite a lively PA slash office manager,
I
doesn't
mean,
she?
she's incredible.
Yeah, quite
Um,
forthright. Yeah.
and one of the people who worked at Jennifer Junior's was, of course, Marilyn Sitzman, who was a receptionist.
Yeah.
And so when Lillian Rogers says, I want you all to go out, I don't care whether you like Kennedy or not, he's our president, he's coming to town. Marilyn Sitzman has this great idea, and she thinks, great, I'm going to go and open a bank account because I hate Kennedy, and there'll be no queues at the bank, and I'll open my first bank account, right?
Mm.
So at this point, Zapruder's in Dealey Plaza taking
Mm.
some test shots of some of his colleagues, and up walks Marilyn Sitzman.
Yeah.
The banks were closed. That's why she couldn't open a bank account. So she walks up to Abraham Zapruder and says, what are you doing? And he says, I'm trying to find a place to shoot the motorcade. And she then becomes his location scout. She looks around the plaza and sees that 4-foot plinth. And she says to him, well, what about there?
Mm.
And he says, but I've got vertigo. And she says, it's okay. I'll steady you from behind.
Mm.
And I just think if you're not fascinated by the serendipity of these moments, this is what I love about this subject. A woman who had gone to open a bank account because she hated Kennedy didn't have the foresight to realize all the banks in town would be closed. And
Mm.
it's down to her
Mm.
that he's on that 4-foot plinth. It's
Yeah.
incredible.
Well,
It's just an incredible story.
it's interesting. It's human. It's very much human. So after the chapter on the right wing side and nut country and so forth,
Mhm.
you introduced something which I hadn't heard for decades, and I was a big fan, and that was the TV soap opera of Dallas. I mean,
Yes.
I was a fan as what, I don't know, 18, 19, 17, 18, 19, whenever it first came out. And I thought that was really quite fun. I mean, I remember saying to Ryan, who's not on the call, but he's X years younger than me. When I was in Dallas for a reasonable period of time, saying, "Well, I'd like to go and see South Fork," which meant absolutely bugger all to him.
Mm.
So I thought that was kind of an interesting chapter, particularly the sort of juxtaposition between who shot JR and who shot JFK.
So the sort of point of that chapter was in the 60s and the 70s, Dallas had done loads of things through the Goals for Dallas program to try and improve its image. So
Mm.
they built the city hall, which is now under threat, by the way. They had loads of infrastructure projects. They did the Kennedy Memorial. Um, they did all of these things to try and improve its reputation and to try and drive tourism back to Dallas, and none of it worked. And then a TV show is broadcast, and at the end of, I think it's season 2, there's an assassination.
Mm.
And my memory of that summer is that there were so many parallels. I remember people that had, taped the episode and they were rewatching it going, well, who did JR phone? And then just before he gets shot, it's the same old questions, Neil.
I
Well, how
know.
many shots were there?
But
Was it from the same gun? Did he
they're all
actually
members of
assassinate?
Dealey Plaza UK, these guys.
Yeah, and I was struck by the sort of parallels. And there's a story where in the summer of that year, the Queen Mother sees Larry Hagman at Royal Ascot, and
Mm.
she buttonholes him and says, "You must tell me who shot you." And he says, "I can't. I'm not allowed." But Gerald Ford, who was obviously on the Warren Commission, he took it one stage further. He got in touch with Leonard Katzman, the producer of Dallas, and said, "You need to tell me this." I can't, for people that weren't around, it was such a big story. And there were, more people watched the revealing episode in 1980 than voted in that year's presidential election. In Turkey, they suspended a session of parliament so the Turkish members of parliament could go home to watch it.
Mm.
But the part that's interesting for me is that the tourism in Dallas went like that.
Mm.
So after all of the infrastructure projects, all of the big ideas, of which none of them worked, the thing that saved Dallas from a tourism perspective was a TV show with an assassination in it.
Yeah, the irony is not.
But this time it was fun and games. And there's a famous question in the UK quiz show, Pointless. And the question was, I think it was, who shot J.R. Ewing in Dallas? And the answer that the contestant gave was Lee Harvey Oswald. That's how these two events kind of got mixed up. He was shot. Someone's just asked who shot JR. It was his niece, Kristen.
Kristen, that's
Yeah,
right.
Kristen.
Yeah.
So I was fascinated how all of the things that they tried to do to bring Dallas back failed, and then an accident happened in this TV show, and of course it just rebranded Dallas into a city of sex, Stetsons, shoulder pads. And when I first started to go to Dallas, people used to say to me, "What are you going to Dallas for, Martin? Who do you think you are? J.R. fucking Ewing." That was people's only association of Dallas, was
Yeah.
the TV show. So I was interested in that.
No, I think it's really interesting. I mean, again, that mentioning the Dallas 63 book, how Dallas did or didn't cope with this terrible event in November, 63. And there is a chapter later on Stephen Fagan. Obviously, you would have read his book on the Texas School Book Depository and the whole shenanigans around what to do with that. And that I think that's it's actually a really interesting book on the history of the TSBD, but it's also enlightening in terms of the political aspects of do we commemorate this? Do we
Yeah.
memorialize this? Or do we delete this? What do we do? What do we do? I mean, that's a real struggle for the city.
Well, there's a piece in the chapter about Tony Glover where she refused to go into the sixth floor, museum, and when she finally went in there to tell her story, she said to someone, "I don't want it." She said, "I'm happy to pay whatever the money is, but I don't want to see your exhibit. I just want to talk to someone."
Hmm.
And then she was introduced to Gary Mack within about 10 minutes. But she was very clear that she never wanted to go there. And of course, Beverly Oliver says something similar. She said that Kevin Costner was her chaperone
Hmm.
into the Sixth Floor Museum for the first time.
I guess you would say that, but
Yeah.
okay. Sorry to be so whatever cynical. Okay, so we move on to your mate Dallas from Dallas and meeting him, and there's a lot of stuff about your musical
Hmm.
connectivity, but obviously that leads you to a really interesting experience at the inverted commas vault at
So he
City
introduces me
Hall.
to a guy. So I meet Dallas from Dallas in Minneapolis. Matt, who's on this call, will know who Dallas from Dallas is. And we have a chance meeting in Minneapolis the week before I'm going to Dallas. And Dallas says, "Well, I know a guy that might be able to help you out with your book." And I say, "Who do you know?" And he says, "My mate John. He's the archivist for the city of Dallas." And I said, I didn't know what an archivist was. And I mean, I kind of did, but I was like, okay, you know, that sounds good. What can he do to help me? And Dallas looked at me over his glasses and he said, he's got a vault. And I said, great, I want to meet him. And then within 2 minutes, Dallas had emailed him and I'd set up a meeting with John Slate, who works in the archives in Dallas. And it was just a lovely chapter of, meeting this guy. He was a real Anglophile. He was fascinated with England and he loved the 60s band The Zombies.
Mm.
And that's all he wanted to talk about. He wanted to talk about all the places in Britain off the beaten track that he'd been to. He was such a sweet guy. But I'm thinking, I'd love to talk to you about all of these things one day, but I know you've got a door over there, and behind that door, there's some great stuff. So, uh, how do I be polite, but
So
also
let's move it on.
move it on, John. We'll talk about the zombies another time. And he went into this door, and he came out with this beige folder, and and he sort of stacked it with there was some fairly irrelevant stuff at the top. And I thought this isn't great. And then there were Jack Ruby's fingerprints from his first arrest from the 24th of November as well. And then the final thing that he handed me was Lee Harvey Oswald's fingerprints.
Mm.
And I've been in touch with John lots and lots of times since.
Mm.
And I'm doing an event in the Sixth Floor Museum in September, and John's going to be part of that. So John is such a sweetheart, and it's one of my favorite chapters in the book because, again, it's all about these people who are continuing the education.
Mm.
John, Stephen Fagan, you, Neil, Tony, the people on this call. And of course, John was the stereotypical archivist. He worked in a basement with no windows. He didn't look like he didn't look like he worked in a place that had a Christmas party. He's doing really good work and he's protecting all of this stuff and he's digitizing it so we can all look at it. And meanwhile, that building, which he works in, which was part of the Goals for Dallas program to, rehabilitate Dallas,
Yeah.
that building's now under threat, the City Hall.
This is the building that's opposite the Ericsson Library, isn't it?
Yeah, this is in Akkad Plaza.
Yeah.
It's the one that they
I
used
have
in.
been there. I've been there to try and speak to an archivist. I don't
Yeah.
know if it was the same guy, but okay.
It's the same building they use in RoboCop
Yeah.
as the police headquarters.
Mm.
Where they invented RoboCop because it's
Yeah.
such a futuristic building, but it's now under threat in Dallas. They're looking at knocking it down.
Right.
But yeah, he was such a good guy.
I think Bart would love to have been in that room when the fingerprint card was shown to you.
I went back.
Oswald's fingerprint card because
I
that's
went back again in November,
Mm.
and this time I went with my partner, and I didn't just go there for one day, David. I went there for. Oh no, sorry, you're answering the previous point. I went back with my partner in November, and my partner and John were chatting away about all sorts of stuff. And this time, this was after the book was written. This time, John just gave me loads of folders and went, "Help yourself." Right.
Mm.
So they're in the.
Can I just ask? Can I ask a question on that? So
Yeah.
obviously we get a lot of that on the Portal of Texas History, as you
Yeah,
know.
yeah.
Is everything digitalized, or is there stuff in that vault that is not being
No, I
uploaded?
believe it's. I didn't ask John that question, but I believe it's all digitized.
Mm.
So on the second trip, I went into the vault. On
Mm.
the first trip, he didn't really know me, and he just handed me a little um, a little folder with some highlights in it. And then the second time, he just let me walk in the vault. And my partner and John are having a long chat. He just says, "Take what you want." And then I'm sitting there, I'm going through stuff, and there's Marina Oswald's first date affidavit.
Yeah.
Howard Brennan. the three tramps plus the fourth tramp
Do you
in,
have to
in my
wear do
hand.
you have to wear gloves to look at this
Uh,
material?
yeah, you are supposed to. I didn't on that occasion. And
Right.
John came back after he'd been chatting with my partner and he said, "Come on, let's have some archivist etiquette." But
Mm. If you,
it,
are you due to go back and see
I,
John?
I'm going back in September. Yeah,
Can you photograph this for us? Maybe put
I,
something
I
into.
I I have photographs of all of Marina Oswald, Howard Brennan, like a lot of those first day affidavits. I have
Mm.
photographs.
And do you think he would be accept he would be he would accept the idea of maybe a few of us next time we're in Dallas meeting him? How
I mean,
protective
I
is
think I
he?
think I think Scott's been there. I think Scott's met him.
Okay.
So it's something that look, I think you have to be respectful of the fact that he's got a job to do,
Yeah.
and it may not be convenient at the time you want to see him.
Mm.
And um, obviously, he is very protective of the
Mm.
artifacts themselves. I would say, from my own experience with him, the first session I had with John, we're just getting to know each other. And then the second time, he was a little bit like on the first session, he didn't take his eyes off me.
No.
And he was very, very careful about everything I touched. On the second one, he was a little bit looser, but not like totally loose. I'm probably exaggerating it for comic effect where he's away with my partner having a good time and I'm just going through the vault. But no, he's very serious about what he does. But
Mm.
as I say, I
Well,
think Scott met him
you
before.
broke the ice with the music discussion and the Anglophile thing, didn't
Yeah.
you? I mean, it's just naturally a
What I didn't
relationship.
know at the time was that for anyone knows the films of Richard Linklater, he was a director. He is still a director, but he made a film called Slacker, which is an independent film.
Mm.
It wasn't hugely watched, but he has gone on and done much bigger films since, like School of Rock and stuff like that.
Oh,
In
okay.
Richard
Great film.
Linklater's
Great film.
in Richard Linklater's first film, Slacker, John Slate is in it playing
Mm.
a conspiracy theorist.
Okay, that's interesting. Scott,
Scott had their hand up, but I also think Pete, didn't you have your hand up before that? And I think I might have missed it, Pete. Okay, no, Scott, you got your hand up, I think.
I was only just going to come in. Just you mentioned me about John Slate, who I have met a couple of times. The time I was down at the archives, Neil, I had arranged an appointment and went down. And as Martin says, it's like no windows, dusty area, etc. And had a couple of hours down there. I remember that there was a lady there. I can't remember her name offhand. But I was down there for maybe a couple of 2 or 3 hours, and she'd said to me that I don't know if people remember the series Hunting Oswald with was it Bob Baer, the kind of FBI, sorry, ex-CIA guy, and she said to me they were down here recently doing some filming, and she said you've been down here longer than they were here, and I was only there for a few hours, so that might tell you everything you need to know about
Really?
the series of Hunting Oswald.
Yeah.
well, it also tells us that you don't need sunlight, Scott, but we know that.
Yes.
I mean, obviously, if you get in touch with them, their initial thing will be, this is all online. You don't need to come here. You don't need to bother us. That'll be their initial response. I do mention in the book that and this wouldn't have been true of Scott, so I don't know how possible it is to get an intro into John. But Dallas from Dallas is a member of an organization called the Odd Fellows, which is often described to me as the kind of Freemasons, but without the religious element. So it's a kind of mutual benefit society, the Odd Fellows. And Dallas from Dallas is an odd fellow, and John Slate is also an odd fellow, and they're part of the same. It isn't congregation, but they're part of the same branch. So I know when Dallas vouched for me, that meant something to John.
Okay, that's interesting. So, one of the later chapters is the chapter where you, and we've all done it in some fashion. You stood in Dealey Plaza, but specifically in all the witness locations that were of interest to you. Do you have any? I mean, because that was kind of an emotional chapter, I felt. But do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, I just wanted to. So, obviously, what I've done with the book is to front load all of these witness stories so that when I finally get there, I
Mm,
hope it has more resonance for the reader and it does have that emotional payoff. And I wanted to, again, make the point that this is not a weird thing to do. There are people that, go to Abbey Road to bring that up again and they walk along the crossing. There are people that go out to Tunisia to see where Star Wars was filmed. We all have our, that those kind of moments where you want to be at the place. And for me, walking around Dealey Plaza, I always approach it from Main Street. And having been there lots of times with Scott in November, it's just, I never quite get tired of that turning, seeing that huge building. And then you're walking around and yes, it's a modern city and there's people using Elm Street to, commute.
mm,
But without meaning to sound too esoteric, you can feel the ghosts of that place. You can feel that, Zapruder was there. Because for people like us, we know all of this. And there was a time in November when I was with Scott and he asked me to take a picture of him with an umbrella up, and it was actually raining, standing in the exact location that the umbrella man was, because we all want to somehow relive that kind of sensory experience. And I just wanted to sort of get in. I think throughout the book, I just wanted to get across my enthusiasm for this subject. Like
mm.
it hasn't beaten me down, and I think part of that is because I'm not trying to win an argument. So I still have this kind of, childish enthusiasm for, oh my God, I'm in Dealey Plaza. I'll never stop having that.
It's really interesting because it's my personal experience. I'm sure others will share this, but every time I go there, however long I spend there,
It's
I
not enough.
I regret that I didn't do something else I should have done
Yeah.
in Dealey Plaza, whether it was an angle from here or the Southern Knoll or the car park, wherever it may be.
I was talking to Scott the other day. I hope he doesn't mind me sharing this. We were talking about potentially going back in November, and
Yeah.
Scott said that, Scott said Dallas is like a drug.
Mm.
And it does feel like that for me. And I know that Tony's on the call and also Carl Kopak was on the call, but he had to go. And I know Tony and Carl are both big, Ripperologists and
Yeah.
they're fascinated with Jack the Ripper. And I know that Carl often goes to the sites of the Jack the Ripper murders and he takes photos and he adds all this commentary about what happened. It's the same thing, isn't it, Tony? It's the same that it's much cheaper for you to get to Whitechapel than it is for us to get to Dallas. But you are fascinated by it, aren't you? You are on mute, mate.
Yeah, yeah, very, very much so. And I think you're absolutely right. I mean, even though I'm familiar with all the sites of the Jack the Ripper um, events, I still, if I'm in the vicinity, will myself and my friend will walk through Mitre Square, even though we've been there loads of times to try and imagine how dark it would have been and so on to get a feel for the place. So I totally get it.
I was having a conversation with my partner a couple of weeks ago, so I'm going back to Dallas in September for a week. And we were talking about potentially going to San Antonio and possibly Waco, Fort Worth. And I hope she doesn't mind me saying this, and she'd sort of planned out maybe 4 or 5 days worth of activity in other cities.
Oh, bless her.
And and then I said, but Katie, that only leaves 2 days in Dallas. And
Mm.
on one of those days, I'm doing an interview with Stephen, and she said, "But you've been there before. You've seen all these places loads of times.
Yeah.
You've
Yeah.
been to the Texas Theater. You've been to." I said, "I no,
Hmm.
I know,
Well,
but
it is a draw. It is a draw, Martin. I mean, I would
yeah,
perhaps add that maybe it's best not to go in November during the circus. I mean, I've done that
yeah."
many times. Well, several times. That's not true. Several times. And around the conference thing, and there are some, I think there's some positives there, but there are also some negatives. Maybe just do it, another time. But
I think so. And so when I went twice last year, but I have to say, and this again isn't in the book because it happened after the book was written, but the best time I've ever had in Dallas was last November when I met up with Scott, not intentionally, but we met at the airport, and then halfway through the trip, we met with James Keane and his partner.
James is on the call as well. Yeah,
James is on the call, and John O'Donnell,
yeah.
and he's also on the call. And there was Scott's good friend John, and that was my greatest memory ever of Dallas because that group of people, we had such a great crew,
Mm.
and so if I hadn't have gone in November, I would have missed that. And it was, I think Scott maybe feels the same, but it was because sometimes you're there when you're there on your own.
Mm.
And then sometimes you're there and there's people who want to, talk about their opinions non-stop to you. But I felt with Scott, James, and John, who I've kept in touch with, is that we really did become friends, and we had a night out at Lee Harvey's, and we did lots of stuff, and it was so good.
Yeah, I agree with
But
that. I
again,
mean,
it's that thing that I'm trying to get across to people about this subject. It's no different from supporting your sports team.
no,
It's no
it's not.
different
Well,
from
it's very similar.
from
Yeah.
what whatever that thing is that you have, whether it's Jack the Ripper or you know Newcastle United. It's that thing that you get together with other people about. It could be a band, it could be anything. For us, look at this. This has been going on for 2 hours, 10 minutes. We've all given up our Sunday afternoon.
Well, no.
I think it's a wonderful thing.
Well, there were seven or
Just
eight of us that went to the 60th anniversary. I think Scott was obviously part of that crew. And you are right. There is a bond when you do go as a collection. I know you didn't actually arrange to go collectively,
Hmm.
but I know that way back in the day, I mean, some of the other guys who are much longer standing members of DP UK, they went on the 50th and they had trips around that period when they were, younger. And I think it does resonate this experience when you can share it with other
All
people.
of this, I should say, is perfectly well summed up by Scott's piece in the latest DD Plaza Echo.
Yeah, yeah. Look, can we just have another loo break slash refreshment break? I'll just pause
Yeah,
it.
should we just do a Q&A when we come back,
Well,
or
we've just got two or three other chapters that I wanted to just
okay, I
ask
shall
you
try
some
and keep it
questions
brief.
on,
Okay,
and
yeah,
then
no problem.
we can open, and then if you don't mind, Martin, and then we can open it up to the floor.
Very happy to
I
do
just
this.
wanted to finish off with the chapters for those people that haven't read the
Okay,
book yet.
cool.
That's
No
all.
problem at all.
Oh, okay, so I'm just going to pause the recording, and we'll come back in a couple of minutes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so if we could just look at the last few chapters of the
Mhm.
book, or not all of them, but let's talk about Stephen Fagin because I think you probably understand what the perception is about him. That he's not wholly transparent. That he hasn't really acted as our advocate in terms of releasing material and films and so forth. He's a big step up from Gary Mack, I think, would be the general perception. I have met him, but I haven't had this kind of interview that you had, where he showed you around the museum, sixth floor, etc. So give us some insight in terms of how you assess him.
So I've never it should be clear the only thing I ever asked Stephen Fagan for was an interview. Um, which he agreed to. We spent maybe 2 to 3 hours talking. And so the first thing I have to say is he was incredibly generous with his time. He was very generous with his recollections and his emotions. A couple of times in the interview where he cried, where he was talking about Kennedy.
Mhm.
It has obviously deeply affected him. Um, I was really struck with Stephen how in a job that he does, excuse me, it's important to understand that because Stephen's the public face of the Sixth Floor Museum, he isn't a CEO or anything. He's just a curator.
Mm.
But he told me about the many funerals that he attends, and I was really touched by that because I thought how many other museum curators as part of their job has to attend this many funerals.
Yeah.
And I did wonder about the weight that that has on Stephen. Um, so, my assessment of it, and he told me that fascinating story, which is in the book, where he was in a department store with his mother when he was a child, and they were going to the till, and his mother said to Stephen, "When you get to the till, don't talk to the cashier.
Mm.
Don't say anything to her," because the
Mm.
cashier was Marina Oswald.
Mm. Yeah.
So, it- uh, look, I take people as I find them. He was generous with me. He was engaged. He he didn't have to do the interview or anything. He didn't really ask what my book was about, so he certainly didn't set any preconditions. He
Mm.
didn't ask whether I was a lone nut guy or a conspiracy. He just didn't ask any of that at all. So he gave up his time, and I was very grateful for it.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, obviously, through all your research over the years, you must have looked at a lot of the oral histories that he's conducted. Um, this is my opinion. I just wanted to share it with you and wonder whether you might concur or not. Do you get a sense that he doesn't, to quote Kevin Costner, he doesn't ask the question? Something comes up in a oral interview and he just doesn't push, he just lets it go. Particularly if it's something which is, this is my perspective, particularly when it's something that isn't um, in line with the Warren Commission narrative.
So I think Stephen is an extremely skilled interviewer, and I would defend him on this by saying that what I what I often find with Stephen's interviews is he gives people a lot of time to share their memories and their thoughts. And Stephen certainly does not try to inject himself into a lot of these stories. And he certainly doesn't, I mean, in the case of Beverly Oliver, for example, I know uh, that Stephen, I think, doesn't believe Beverly Oliver, but he does a very neutral oral history with her. I know that Tony Glover has found Stephen a very a very warm interviewer on a subject that she can get very nervous about. So yes, I think you're right to say that he isn't an advocate in those interviews, but I don't think that's his job. And I do think the oral histories are a remarkable resource. Now, people might watch them and think, or they might watch some of them and think, well, on that particular witness, I would have asked that, or I would have wanted to know that. But I think that the fact that they're all there for us to view is, and they were a huge help for me in the book, actually.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. So you mentioned Tony. I think we're going to finish on three women. Um, I think the Tony Glover chapter or chapters, I can't recall now,
Yeah,
were
she's in it for about 4 chapters
yeah,
because
very
I just tell
interesting.
her story, then I meet her, and then we go on a bit of a road trip.
Really good stuff. Those collection of chapters. Do you want to, for that again, for those people that haven't read the book, do you want to summarize your experience with her and your and how you created the friendship and so forth?
Yeah, so I first got in touch with Tony because I saw one of the oral histories that she did, and she's pretty easy to find, Tony. And I said to her, I'd be interested in having a conversation with you. And I made her a promise that I would never ask her how many shots she heard
Hmm.
from what direction or anything like that at all. I just wanted to talk to her because I found her story interesting. She was 11 years old. She she went to Dealey Plaza not to see Kennedy because she wanted Kennedy to see her. She had an abusive father. She had a troubled childhood, and with the kind of magical thinking of an 11-year-old, she had seen Kennedy on TV, always with his kids, um, often surrounded by the Secret Service, and she thought if Kennedy saw me, she would be safe. She thought no one would ever hurt a kid that Kennedy knew, which is why she's standing on that
Then
plinth
yeah.
a few feet down from Howard Brennan, wearing blue, and she's going like that. So Kennedy does see her, and they do lock eyes, and for a couple of seconds, Tony feels safe, and then of course it all unravels. She goes back to Oak Cliff where she lives with her mother, and then she has this really, quite sad life of depression, multiple suicide attempts. But she recovers through recovers through academia. She ends up becoming a professor of English, which is what she is now. I find her story really, really touching. It doesn't tell us anything about the assassination.
Hmm.
It tells us something about an 11-year-old girl in Dealey Plaza. What was interesting about her, and I touched on this in the epilogue, is when I interviewed Tony in Dallas in November, and Scott and James were there. We went through the whole of her life experience, the depression, the suicide, everything. And then there was a Q&A at the end, and a bunch of hands shot up. I think Scott asked a good question, but the other questions were, so how many shots did you hear? What direction did they come from? Did you see anything strange in Lyndon Johnson's car? Did you
Hmm.
see the limo stop? And me and Tony just looked at each other and kind of laughed. And I mean, look, fair enough, it's a JFK assassination conference, but she doesn't know any. It was 62 years ago and she was 11.
Hmm.
And the talk that we had was about the breadth of her life. And again, it was that thing where people just wanted to reduce her to those 6 seconds.
Yeah.
There is nothing that Tony Glover is ever going to tell anyone that is going to make a difference in this case.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good point. I think sums it all up. But you certainly had you certainly developed a good friendship with her. You had a kind of like
Yeah.
I'm going to call it a mini road trip, but it's kind of like a Dallas related road trip. But it sounds
There
like
was a
one of
lovely
fun.
moment where we went to see Pat Hall, who
Yeah.
was the same age as Tony.
Who is my next question, by the way?
Yeah, so they're the same age, and Tony and Pat they were having a chat about being teenage girls in a Dallas, and it got quite lewd, I have to say. And Tony and Pat are both large-breasted women, and
Mm.
they spent about 5 to 10 minutes talking about the size of their breasts and just reminiscing about rival schools in Dallas, meeting boys. And I was like, I wasn't embarrassed, but It wasn't what I expected.
Well,
But again,
it's the human side of things.
it's the human side of things, Neil, which is what I was interested in.
Yeah.
And for Pat, it was a huge relief because, as you know, you'll have been to Pat's lots of times. A
Mm,
succession of people just come into her house and they just go into the bedroom and then they walk out, and
mm,
then 30 minutes later another tour comes in.
mm,
And Pat with Tony found a real, they both lived really near each other when they were both 11. And it was really touching to see them both being dragged out of the event that defines them to instead have a laugh of these two older women
mm.
talking about, chasing boys when they were 18.
It's very
It was
interesting
good.
you say this because I have met Pat Hall several times, and I did an
Mm.
interview with her with Ryan. It was one of our Diddy Platzer UK Zoomcasts quite a few years ago, and I was really interested in what the vibe was like. The sort of social side of Oak Cliff, and what she recalls as a child, and you know not just purely the Lee Harvey Oswald aspect of 1026, but just what it was like to grow up in the area, and that to
Mm.
get to understand the human aspect here, and also post the assassination. I mean, a lot of these people, as you quite rightly know, you focus very much on the Dealey Plaza witnesses, but had really difficult experiences
Mm.
post the assassination, whether it's Joe Molina in the Texas School Book Depository, or Tony Glover, or the
Mm.
the owners of 1026 Beckley. I mean, I know there is a question mark as to whether he may have been a resident there, but if we assume that he was, what that meant to that family living with that, because there was a stigma to that.
Yeah. The most amazing thing that sort of struck me, and I'd been to 1026 Beckley before, but there was, two things that sort of struck me was that she kept referring to him as Mr. Lee. She
Yeah.
still knows him as O.H. Lee. But the other thing was that she said 18 men lived there.
Mm.
And when you're in that living room, you think where? Because you say it's a single story, isn't it? I mean, I think it's a basement.
Well, so there's three aspects of it. There's the main house
Hmm.
component, there is the annex at the rear, and then there is the basement level of the main house. And unusual in terms of the topography, um, they were able to build a basement underneath the what we call the ground floor. It's quite unusual,
Hmm.
and it just allegedly for that part of Dallas. So they had the basement, and there were rooms in the basement, and they put boarders into either the annex or the basement if they were shift workers, if they were more likely to work in the evening, and not and come home at
Yeah.
odd hours, or they just didn't want them in. So yeah, I can't remember whether it was 17 or 18 rooms, or whatever. But I mean, my question with you regarding Pat, and how we've got, I don't know what your spectrum is, in terms of Tony Glover maybe on one end of the spectrum, maybe Beverly Oliver on the other end, Howard Brennan close to that end. Where do you put Pat Hall in the spectrum of believability and credibility in your view?
I honestly don't. I just don't make those assessments. I don't. I mean, who am I to know whether Pat Hall's telling the
But you
truth or
have
not?
you have leanings, of course you have leanings. We all have leanings.
I mean, as far as she's concerned, I mean, look, there's a couple of things with Pat Hall, right? The first one is she's trying to run a business in difficult times for her,
Mm.
right? She's trying to she's trying to maintain money, and that in itself you have to take into account when anyone's telling you anything. The second thing is, and you touched upon it, is about her family's reputation. And how does that affect the stories that she tells today? So is she embarrassed? If she thought Lee Harvey Oswald was the assassin, would she be embarrassed about that? So look, she tells her, look, she wasn't in Dealey Plaza. She was 11 years old at the time. She always tells this apocryphal story about Lee Harvey Oswald, always helping her with her homework, always splitting up the fights between her and her brothers, and saying something about, you know, peace is good. She always do. Every time I've seen Pat Hall, she tells that story.
Mm.
But I don't think she has any particular insight into into the assassination at all. I mean, look, she obviously believes it to be a conspiracy. She believes that David Ferry was involved in it. She believes that I think she said to me that she thought that Oswald and Ferry were having an affair. She's entitled to her opinion as much as anyone else is, but um, I certainly didn't walk out of that place thinking that I'd learned something new, or that I met anyone who was being deliberately disingenuous. I thought this is someone trying to make a living by, selling tickets to a rooming house. And again, like Stephen, I made an appointment. She was really generous with her time. You can see with a lot of these people, they go onto autopilot. They tell the same story again and again and again,
Mm.
which was why it was nice that Tony was there, because they both went off
Mm.
piste. So I'm thankful for her time. I had a great time in her company, and I left it at that.
Mm. I do agree with you. I think they do tell the same story. Of
Mm.
course, lots of witnesses in this saga don't tell the same story. They embellish their story.
Yeah.
But I felt that she has been consistent. But I have gone back and spoken to her or emailed her, and I've asked questions that I didn't cover in meetings or interviews that I had with her. And I found that, I did get additional information, stuff that, just, and not tough, nefarious questions, just little bits and pieces that I thought of, after I'd been there before. I mean, I was in Dallas in Oak Cliff one year where I went back and knocked on the door and asked two questions,
Mm.
you know, and I said, I just have a question here about this and that. And
What
she's
is
very
the
good.
insight that you've got from her? What is the
Well, I'm a bit like you, right? I mean, I think I'm over the fence, you're on the fence, but I'm inclined to believe her story, but I think there are some issues that trouble me.
Hmm.
And I don't
Well,
want to go. I don't want to go
okay.
down the
Just,
he didn't live in 1026 Beckley route when there is some good research out there that might well be
yeah.
very, very valid. And Ed Ledoux actually is the guy that drove that research. I don't really want to go down that route. I'm prepared to give her the benefit of the doubt. Um,
I mean, a sort of other thing. I mean, a sort of other insight, and this is why my book might frustrate people on this call, because the sort of insights that I often got were not about the assassination. It was about these people, and I just found it a little bit sad, maybe, that she's living in a museum. I
she
mean,
is.
she still lives there, and living room is um done up to look like 1963. There's lots of 1963.
But it hasn't changed. It hasn't
No,
changed.
there's lots of 1963 newspapers
Yeah.
on the table. It's got an old television set. And I just found, from a human perspective, that's kind of odd.
Mm.
She's
But
not
given
going
the
to work there. She lives there.
but
And
given
of
the
course,
theme of your book,
yeah,
it really is another interesting chapter because
that's the insight I
it's
get.
another
What's it,
angle. It's
what's
another
it
angle.
like
Mm.
to, live it? And of course, so much of Dallas is unchanged. You go to the backyard in, Neely Street. It's
Mm.
it's the same.
But that's in risk of being torn down, by the way.
I know, yeah, which should be
It's
should
really
be such a shame.
disappointing. Yeah, no, that's good. All right, well, look,
Let's move on.
that's enough on Pat. The final thing I was going to ask you was about Alison, but I think we touched on that
Yeah.
earlier on. But I think my personal view is a big shout out to her for this
Mm,
kind of work that she's doing, and she will be here next weekend. She'll
yeah.
be bringing some artifacts like Johnny did last year and she did last year. And I thought that I don't want to talk about the DP UK chapter. I think we got through that relatively unscathed, which is good. And compared to the DP UK people you met in whatever the 50th. But I
Oh
think
yeah.
I think there is a shout out for Alison for what she's doing, and I thought that was a
Yeah, and look,
really
I can
important
I
chapter.
happily repeat now what I said in the chapter, which was that I mean everyone there was so welcoming to me,
Yeah.
and um, I said to lots of people that I'm an agnostic on this. I don't have a firm view. It's not why I'm interested in it. And I spent a wonderful weekend with lots of people, and it
Mm.
was, and I'm very grateful to all of them.
Well, that's good. Well, if there's anybody here who's on this call that's not a member who would like to be a member, if you do become a member, you can attend remotely at our event next weekend. So, on that note, I would like to open it up to the floor. There's so many things you've covered. Tony, I know that there's a lot of stuff in the chat, so if you could perhaps go through the chat and see if there's any specific questions that might be people might want to ask, either you do on their behalf or they can have the floor.
I think
I did,
also Tim has his hand up.
okay, I did just one quick thing. I did notice that Scott said that he knows more about the TV show Dallas than the JFK assassination. So,
Scott's a big Dallas TV show fan.
so well done, Scott. All right, so let's.
Tim, do you have your hand up? Are you there? Okay, he has his hand up, but he's not there. So, would anyone like to ask any questions?
Matt would like to ask a question.
And Scott's got his hand up as well. Okay, Matt, go
Let's
for it.
let Scott go first. He was before me.
Scott,
I don't know that I was, but I'm happy to go first if you
you
prefer.
go first, Scott.
Yeah, well, Martin, thanks for the talk, and it's a great book, so I would recommend it to anybody that hasn't read it. When Martin was telling you earlier about the story of him taking the picture of me with the umbrella, where Umbrella Man was standing, the thing he doesn't add to that story is that when I opened up the umbrella, a bullet flew out the top of the umbrella. So you might want to tell the full story, Martin. There was a couple of things I just wanted to ask you about. When we went to remember we went to the US Post Office building and we
Yes.
saw Oswald's alleged PO box.
Yeah.
What we omitted to look for there, and maybe you did when you went back, was the other PO box 1792, which was Bernard Wiseman's post office box, who placed the ad in the Dallas Morning News. Now, I wasn't aware of that post office box was there, but we missed that. So maybe if we go back, we'll check that out.
I think
Uh, and
you're inventing another reason for us to go back to Dallas,
yeah,
aren't you?
as if we needed one, but
It's one of
that
my
that is
favorites. One of my favorite sites in Dallas is the PO box. Is it 2613? Where you go into the Dallas post office
yeah.
on Irving Street and the alleged PO box of Oswald is still there as it was. It's not been changed. You can see those metal PO boxes date from the 40s or the 50s, and that is
Yeah.
and there's never anyone there, is there, Scott? When you go there,
No, there's not.
it's not a known
And obviously,
site.
we managed to. Oops, If I went on mute, no,
Yeah,
we managed to talk ourselves upstairs where the Warren Commission held their hearings, some of their hearings in Dallas. And there's just a couple of things I wanted to ask you, Martin, if you could think about the girl that told us. Remember when we were there that there was a cell that
yeah,
Lee Harvey Oswald had spent the night in after he'd been arrested, which me and you both looked at each other and went, No, that can't be right. But we didn't want to burst the girl's bubble, which she was nice enough to let us in there. So I wondered if you wanted just to mention that. And secondly, about the Umbrella Man, I mean, I hear everything you say about him, and I haven't investigated the Umbrella Man to any great degree, but I'm interested in how he was motivated enough to, you know, to know even that the Umbrella was a protest, that Kennedy was in town, that he wanted to be there. He witnessed his assassination, and then apparently went off, off the grid, so to speak, and his interests seemed to be completely eradicated after that. It just doesn't seem consistent with somebody who went to all those lengths before the assassination for afterwards to just go off the grid. So I was just interested in your.
You have mentioned this to me before, Scott. Let's deal with the woman in the post office first. So the woman in the post office took us upstairs, and there's a cell in the US Postal Office in Hervey Street in Dallas. And she told me and Scott, and this woman was in her 30s maybe. She told me and Scott that Lee Harvey Oswald spent the night of the 22nd in that cell in the post office. And me and Scott looked at each other, and we didn't say anything because, you know, but there's no evidence of this whatsoever. And again, it's one of those things that you have to be careful of, that in an attempt to please, people are telling tourists things that are not true. I cannot imagine a world where they took Oswald out of the Dallas police station and then held him in a cell in the post office. But there is a cell there. To your other point, Scott, about the Umbrella Man. I mean, you sort of talk like I say, like he went off grid. He didn't become a prepper, He just didn't read books about the assassination, and there was no internet back then, and you say about he sort of made all of this effort. He didn't really make much effort at all. He was a conservative, as a lot of people in Dallas were. This was the city that Kennedy lost with a bigger majority than any other city in the 1960 election. Right? It's not a lot of love for Kennedy in Dallas. And fade not Bart, there was no internet. But and he had heard at work that umbrellas were a sore point with the Kennedys. And as a conservative, he went down to Dealey Plaza. He obviously didn't know it was going to be, he didn't know he was going to be a witness to the assassination. He just went to what he perceived to be a quiet place and he did this little heckle. Now, I would say, bearing in mind everything we know about Dallas in 1963, the wanted for treason, the leaflets, the advert in the Dallas Morning News. Here you have someone who is a visible demonstration of the politics at the time. It would be stranger, I think, if you didn't see that amongst the witnesses of Dealey Plaza. And here you have someone who is demonstrating their anti-Kennedy allegiance. And then he just went back to work. And I think not everyone read Rush to Judgment. Not everyone read John Updike in the New Yorker. Not everyone read Accessories After the Fact. He's the guy. I mean, look, everything's possible, Scott. And we can get to those possibilities in a second. But he is the guy on the cover of Abbey Road, who didn't know he was going to be there, and for years didn't know that he was there. But I would ask you to look at the other alternatives of what Louis Stephen Witt or the Umbrella Man was. I find it incredibly strange still that trained assassins looking through telescopic scopes need a man with an umbrella to tell them when to shoot. And as for the R.B. Cutler theory about the dart coming out the umbrella, and the theory that the dart was there to immobilize Kennedy. And I do mean this respectfully, but frankly, isn't that what the high-powered rifles are for? If you want to immobilize someone, shoot them in the head. Why would you give the first shot to a man with an umbrella? It just so in the spectrum of what's most likely, and I know through speaking to Tony, and I know through speaking, I remember one of the things that Mary Mormon said to me in November when I said, "Did it have a big effect on you? The assassination? Did it really affect the next 10 years of your life?" She was like, "No, of course it didn't. I had a life to lead. I had kids to raise." She said, I just got on with my life." The woman who took one of the most consequential pictures of the assassination, a sixth of a second, after the headshot, she said it had no impact on her whatsoever, and she just got on with her life. Tony and her mother never came forward. I mean, Tony was 11, she probably wouldn't have done. But her mother never came forward because she didn't think she had anything to tell. So I
John,
don't find it weird in a way that I know that you do, that I don't find it, I don't position it as he made all of this effort. He did this silly thing, and then he didn't read the books that we read.
I mean, just to be clear, I mean, I'm not suggesting
I
that
know,
I
I know.
believe, that he had a, that the umbrella was some kind of CIA prototype and he used that, or he was even involved at all. I just have some difficulty reconciling what he did before Dealey Plaza with his life afterwards. And but I'll leave others to come in now.
Matt, is Matt still here? Did Matt have Matt, you had a question. You're on mute, I think, Matt.
Hey, good morning. It's not really a question, just there's so much to
Where are you calling
digest.
from, Matt? Where are you?
Sorry, Southern California, where it is
Southern
now
California. Here we go.
9:48 in the morning, which I'm a little bit jealous because Neil's got a pint going, and it would be very weird for me to do that at 9:40 in the morning. But anyways, just a few things, Martin. You know, ordered it from the UK. I didn't want to wait till July 24th. But before I get the observations from the book, just a few things. It's not something I've like, thought about all the time, but one of the reasons why the whole thing with the assassination has been in my head for a long time is my mother was born in 1919, as was JFK, and lifelong Democrats, and her and my dad. I was born in 1961, so I was not even 2 years old. But my mom and dad went to the Democratic convention at the LA Sports Arena for
Wow.
his speech. So they were long time, both gone now. Um, and so it affected her greatly.
Mhm.
And then when RFK was assassinated, we were watching it on live television here in the greater Los Angeles area. So that's what got me. And so I actually was in Dallas to see the New York Jets play the Cowboys. Don't ask why I'm a Jets fan. It's long suffering. But I was flying out Monday late after the game was Sunday. So I went. I went over to the museum and I I left there like, I mean, flabbergasted. There was so much to take in. So there's that. When it gets to the book, oh, one other thing. We're coming in September. Martin already knows this.
Hmm.
We just happen to be already going to visit my partner Sue. Her sister lives there. So we're going to visit, and it just so happens Martin's going to be speaking. And you were talking about South Fork. I looked up their address just to see where we were going to be staying. They literally live around the corner from South Fork. Like
Cool.
you leave their street and you turn right, and it's right there at the entrance. So we may be going on that tour.
That's
Um,
good.
anyway, getting to the book, the the thing that I really got into, and I can almost picture like when you and Tony were talking and going out and driving around and everything, she fascinates me. And I guess my question would be more for her, and she's not here, but I think if she wrote a book about her life, it would be amazing.
Well, I've got some great news for you, Matt, because she has. It's called The Girl in Blue, Be in There, and
Oh,
it'll be released soon.
the girl in blue. Yeah, she just seems like fun.
I have to
Um,
say that ever since one of the most frequent comments I've had from people is about Tony and how they can meet Tony and stuff like that. So
I will keep an eye out for it.
cool. Bart, you have your hand up.
Yes. Can you hear me? Okay.
I can hear you loud and clear, Bart, as
Good,
always.
good. Um, I followed your story with interest, and the Umbrella Man, I understand that part. The only part that I can't reconcile is the guy with raising his fist who steps onto the road and raises his fist. And for me, that clearly is, and I am speculating here, which I rarely do, but this time I will, is for him to give the signals. You see, I don't see the brolly as a signal. I see the guy raising his fist. If you follow the Zapruder film and you see at the shooting sequence after the first shot when he grabs his throat and he's not dead yet, basically that guy steps up onto the street and raises his fist. It's perfect timing for it basically to say, keep shooting. And
I'm doing a
I
talk on that guy next Sunday, Bart.
right, I find the behavior of the two of them sitting down calmly on the pavement, whether he claims he knew him or not, is completely besides the point. The fact that they're sitting down together and standing up and going in separate ways at the same time, sorry, too suspicious. It's just too coincidental. It's too beautiful, like Donald Trump. It's just too nice. Sorry, I'm not buying it, not for a second.
I don't know. I mean, I think Paul Cummins again in the chat said that he brought his umbrella to the HSCA hearings because, of course, we all keep umbrellas for 15 years. I have an umbrella, which I've had for 12 years now. So I do find some of this speculation interesting. I have a huge amount of respect for the work that you've done, Bart, but they were just two guys who sat on a curb. I don't know what that means. Other than I think it means we look at that and we say these people look calm. The babushka lady looks calm, but in I would go back to the John Updike quote about if you study any period of time, and you'll remember when there was the assassination attempt on Trump in Butler, Pennsylvania. Lots of people were looking at some of the people in the background on that event and said, well, this guy didn't darken, this person did something weird. Isn't human life just random?
I go on human behavior. I go
But
on what are the characteristics of this particular person
I
in
know,
this particular moment.
but when people do that, it isn't an object because the human behavior part is that two men sat on a curb. That's the human behavior. And then they got up, one went this way, the other one went that way. What you're doing is interpreting that behavior. And of course you're perfectly entitled to do that. But you're interpreting that behavior as something suspicious
Very well.
because you're looking.
I'm gonna cut it right there, and then I'm not gonna go any further. Thank you very much.
Cool.
I mean,
Anyone else?
just on that point, Martin. I mean, isn't it, for me, it strikes that these are two people that could potentially are traumatized. They're just seeing somebody shot in front of them. And isn't it normal that you would want to seek somebody, another human being out and just sort of be with them and say, can you just believe what happened? Did you see that? Because I've seen it a lot with even simple things like you're waiting for a train and there's a delay, the train's being cancelled. You'll end up talking to the person beside you saying, can you believe this? I've got to get to work. So for me, another interpretation, and as you say, Bart's got his thoughts. Another interpretation would be there's just two human beings that wanted to sit together and and be together, but after watching something extremely traumatizing. Do you think that's
Tony,
that's a possibility?
Tony, do you mind if I just interject just for a second?
Sure.
This is something that is probably going to come up in the whole racial aspect of Martin's talk next week. But the particular chapter that he refers to the DCM as the Black Cap Man.
Hmm.
The title of that chapter is something like
They done shot them
they done
folks.
shot
Yeah,
those folk they've
them
done
folks.
shot those folks. So
Hmm.
there is DeWitt saying that DCM, as we know him, said they done shot those folks.
Hmm.
So it's something that we can explore next weekend in
All I
person.
would say is that Tony's interpretation and Bart's interpretation are at opposite ends. One of them interprets the behavior as suspicious, the other one interprets the behavior as, human nature. And I would say, both of those are possible. Um, the fact is we don't know. There is no conclusive evidence over either of those two men. All that we have is the testimony of Louis Stephen Witt and the photography. That's all we have. I guess my argument is if you take a photo of any group of people and if you zoom in, you are going to see some strange things. But if anyone wants to I think still go back to the original point, which is that it's funny how this always ends up talking about the Umbrella Man. Look, I'm not here to change anyone's mind on that. If you want to believe the Umbrella Man, fired a dart or he was providing a signal for people, it is possible.
Yeah, I think one thing we can discuss next week, Martin, is the possibility of a transistor radio or a walkie-talkie with respect to Black Catman. I'm sure that will come up in conversation next week.
That will definitely come up next week.
Yeah. All right. Is Paul still on the call? Paul, I mean, you did make an assertion in the chat way earlier on. Do you want to say anything about Umbrella Man? Do you have anything additional to mention?
I think this is Paul Cummins rather than Paul Brown.
Yeah, Paul Cummins. Yeah.
No, I just disagree. I think all due respect to the guest, I think it's been established who the dark complected man and who the umbrella man was. Interpen with Roy Hargraves was more than likely the umbrella man. And Philippe Santiago, I think his name, I'm probably butchering it, was dark complected
Yeah.
man.
His name is Philippe Vidal Santiago.
Santiago, yeah. And so the way
What's
they
the
described
strongest?
it, there was two different teams that were signaling for two different people signaling for different teams.
What's the biggest evidence you have, Paul, or what's the strongest evidence you have? You said that it's been established that it was Hargreaves and Santiago. What is the
Roy
strongest?
Hargraves did an interview with Noel Twine. I think it was High Bloody Treason book, and they decided to pull it out of the book, but later on it got published with Roy Hargraves, and basically they roundabout way talked about his role, what happened that day.
Okay, but what's the strongest evidence that you have that it was either Hargreaves or Santiago in Dealey Plaza?
That's part of the interview, what he talks to Hargraves about. It's in the
So,
book.
as we know, there are many people that have come forward and they have claimed to be in Dealey Plaza that day. Whether it's James Files, whether it's Beverly Oliver. I'm not sure if you believe all those people as well, Paul. I guess I would just say I'm intrigued as why you don't believe the other person that came forward, which is Louis Stephen Witt.
Because his testimony, if you watch it, everyone laughs at it. It's just his recollections don't make any sense. Basically, his video testimony is a train wreck, in my opinion. Just watching
I
it.
just have a different I mean, I've obviously watched it many times, and I have a different interpretation of that. What I see is a man who doesn't want to be there. He feels embarrassed. I think there are some comedy elements where they, retrieve the umbrella and they open it and the whole committee ducks just in case it's got a dart within it. But I think his story is very human. I'm not saying 100% is true, but people do strange things.
Hmm.
But he is someone that's come forward, and I guess we as people, we choose to believe some and not to believe others. I would say that whether you believe Louis Stephen Witt or not, the similarity of Louis Stephen Witt in 1978 compared to the man in Dealey Plaza is very clear to me. It looks like Louis Stephen Witt. And I don't think that Black Cat Man looks like either Orlando Bosch or Philippe Vidal Santiago, but
There's a good website, Tango 63. Check it
yeah,
out. There's a lot of pictures there with him. It's
I was on
pretty
there this
simple.
morning, Paul. I don't think I don't think they look the same. I don't, and I'm going to cover this next week, but I do not think there is convincing evidence that Santiago or Orlando Bosch are the so-called Radio Man. I just don't think it's convincing. In the same way that I don't think that Charles Harrelson was one of the tramps. I think some people have taken some photos of some people and they've put them next to some blurry photos of other people. And to me, that's not convincing evidence. But it's up to it, as I say, we all choose who we want to believe.
Okay.
There's a question in the chat, and I'm not sure whether John just put in, talking about any further thoughts on the Tippett shooting after doing the walking and driving tour last November with Matt Doohit.
My partner has very strong opinions about it. As someone who was never particularly interested in the case, she is now very firmly of the view that Oswald couldn't have got to 10th and Patton in the time that the Warren Commission says. The Tippett shooting is not. I'm not an expert on that. I think Matt does a really great job of explaining the geography of the witnesses, how complicated it is. I think Matt certainly shone some reasonable doubt on that, and he did so at Dealey Plaza UK last year as well.
Yeah, I think he certainly did.
And I think mostly, John, it was just a lot of fun because it was it was the first time we'd done the whole, leave the book depository, walk 7 blocks up Elm,
Yeah.
get on the bus and all of that
And
sort of
I
stuff.
know you've said how far away they got dropped in the taxi before walking back,
I couldn't believe, I'd always read that as he told the taxi driver to just go like a couple of blocks past, but it's ages. It was quite a long walk back from where the taxi stopped to 1026 Beckley, and that shocked me.
I think me and Katie walked it, Martin, because we kind of walked ahead and we were trying
Yeah.
to kind of walk at a reasonable
You did
pace.
it in
It took us
16
about,
minutes, didn't you?
no, it was about 6.5 minutes. It wasn't, I'm pretty
Oh,
sure
sorry,
it
you're
was,
talking about the taxi to the.
yeah, back to the
Sorry, I was
rooming
talking
house.
about. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that was about 6.5 minutes. So it's still quite a long way to be dropped off past his own premises.
Yeah, it was interesting. Matt's a great guy and he does lots of good work. Any other questions or comments?
Well, Martin, we're just coming up to the 3 hour mark, so well done.
Only
Thank
comment
I
I'd
can I
like to make
just
is, yeah, go ahead,
yeah.
Scott.
No, I mean, just Martin's probably too, wouldn't want to blow his own trumpet on this, but I just wanted to add that Martin is doing a show at the Edinburgh Festival about the book at the Fringe in August. So if anybody's around Edinburgh at the Fringe and wants to go and see it, let me know, and we can all go along and see Martin do his stuff.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. I forgot about that. You can be my
You written it
agent.
yet?
Perhaps,
Not.
perhaps Johnny and Sarah Baker.
Well, I know
Yeah,
John.
yeah. I
I know
plan on
John's
getting
coming.
it.
Mm.
Yeah, I
John's
forgot to
coming.
say. Yeah.
7th of August, John, are you coming?
Johnny's not on the call, I don't think. No, Johnny's not on the
John
call.
O'Donnell on the
Oh,
the
John
call.
O'Donnell, yeah, he's on the call.
So Scott Webster's coming on the 12th.
Okay, good.
But yeah, again, and it's all part of the, I guess, trying to introduce this subject to a brand new audience and to tell and to share my enthusiasm for it. And at the end of it, let people think what they want to think. That's really none of my business. I'm just an enthusiast.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's wrap it up there, Martin. Very interesting book and a very interesting dialogue this afternoon, and we look forward to your presentation next weekend. I guess before I go, there are quite a few people on the call who are coming next weekend. Please be there ready to go around 2:45, 2:50 on Friday the 26th. And for those of you on the call who are friends of Martin, if you are interested in joining DP UK, then you will be able to access all of the weekend or just stuff you might want to dip into next weekend. And it's a notional fee to attend remotely. All right, guys. Well, thank you very much, Martin. See you next
Can I
weekend.
just say, Neil, thank you to you for organising this. Always thank you to Tony for everything he does on the tech side. Thank you to people that said nice comments in the chat. But really, very good to see you. I look forward to next week. Thank you for giving up what is nearly 3 hours or so. I really appreciate that. And Neil, what a superb host, and thanks for all your thoughtful questions. I appreciate that.
Yeah, well, no worries. It was a great book. Okay. See you next week, guys. Bye.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Martin. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.